I used to think the desert was empty. People talk about it like it's a place without life, just sand, rock, and sun. But when you work out here long enough, you start to realize that it isn't empty at all. It's the opposite. The desert is full of things you don't see at first, things that watch you without moving, that wait without rushing. You learn to respect it, or you don't last long. I worked as a traveling mechanic, mostly running between little towns scattered across Nevada. The pay wasn't much, but I liked the solitude. It meant hours of driving old service trucks through dry basins and into broken canyons, fixing stranded RVs, patching up busted axles, or just helping people who thought their engine had died when they'd only run out of coolant. You get used to the rhythm, the heat rising off the asphalt, the smell of hot rubber, the silence between towns. That summer, I was spending nights out of my own RV, an old Winnebago with a generator that rattled if you pushed it past 2 hours. I parked wherever I could find shade, behind shuttered gas stations, old pullouts, or those forgotten campground spurs where no one goes anymore. I told myself I liked the independence, but the truth was it could get lonely out there. When the radio went out of range and your cell phone showed nothing but dead bars, it was just you and the desert. The night it started, I had been driving east from Tonopah. The sun had already dropped, and the desert turned into that dark ocean of scrub and stone where you can't see depth anymore, just endless black stretching away. My headlights caught jackrabbits darting, sometimes the glint of a bottle or a piece of rusted metal sticking out of the sand. I was about an hour from where I planned to park for the night when I saw the lights. At first, I thought it was just another roadside attraction. Nevada is full of strange little tourist traps, glowing signs that promise the world's biggest thermometer or alien burgers or haunted mineshaft tours. But this wasn't along the highway. This was out in the open desert, far from any road I recognized. It was too bright, too alive. I slowed the truck, leaning forward over the wheel. There, across the scrub flats, was a carnival. A Ferris wheel spun slowly, its lights twinkling like a string of colored pearls in the dark. There were rows of tents, each striped in bright colors, glowing under hanging bulbs that swung as if from a breeze I couldn't feel. Cotton candy stands, midway games, the whole works. But the strangest part wasn't what I saw. It was what I didn't hear. No music, no laughter, no barkers shouting about prizes or wheels clattering on the rides. Even with my truck engine idling, I should have heard something carrying across the desert night. But there was nothing, just the faint hum of my own fan belt and the vast silence pressing in on all sides. I pulled over to the shoulder, heart kicking a little harder than I'd like to admit. I cut the engine. Still nothing. The lights burned on, steady and impossible. I sat there longer than I probably should have, staring, convincing myself it had to be a temporary fairground set up by one of the small towns. Maybe the wind was wrong and it carried the sound away, but the longer I watched, the less it felt right. The Ferris wheel turned too slowly, like it wasn't meant for passengers. The tents were too perfect, as if no dust or grit from the desert had ever touched them. I should have kept driving. I know that now, but something about it drew me in, the way a mirage tempts a dying man. I pulled the truck off onto a dirt track that looked like it led in that direction. My headlights bounced over ruts and scrub brush. Dust clouded behind me. And then my lights caught something strange. An RV. It was parked just off the track, half buried in sand, as if it had been there a long time. Its windows were blown out, tires shredded down to rims. But the strangest thing was the way the paint still gleamed under my beams, almost as if someone had polished it recently. I slowed, thought about stopping to check it, but something in me recoiled. I couldn't even say why. The carnival lights still burned in the distance, promising something more urgent, so I pressed on. The track ended abruptly at a rise. I cut the headlights, let my eyes adjust, and climbed out. That's when the silence hit me in full. Out here, the desert usually has a background of sound. The wind shifting grit, a night bird calling, insects scratching in the brush. But this was different. It was as though sound itself had been stripped away. I could hear my heartbeat, the creak of my boots on the dirt, the faint hiss of blood in my ears, but nothing else. Below me stretched the carnival, bright, alive, spinning in total silence. I wanted to turn back, but my feet carried me forward. I walked down the slope, crunching over gravel, moving toward the rows of glowing tents. The first thing I noticed when I reached them was the smell. Not sugar or popcorn or fried dough like you'd expect. Instead, it was chemical, sharp and metallic, like ozone after a lightning strike. It made my teeth ache. I stepped past a row of game stalls, glass bottles stacked in pyramids, rings laid neatly on hooks, all waiting, and the prizes, giant stuffed animals still wrapped in clean plastic, their eyes unblinking in the glow. I whispered, "Hello?" Nothing. I tried louder. "Anyone here?" No answer, not even an echo. The silence pressed harder, making my chest feel tight. I turned toward the Ferris wheel. Its cars swung gently, moving without wind. I swear I saw something inside one of them, a shape sitting motionless. My breath caught, and I looked harder, but the lights flickered across the metal, and when they steadied again, the car was empty. That's when I realized something else. The lights weren't attached to anything. The poles rose up, but when I looked closer, I couldn't see wires or bulbs, just points of color hanging in the air, pulsing faintly like fireflies that refused to move. I backed away, pulse racing. I should have turned and run. I should have gotten back in my truck and never looked back. But then I heard it, the first sound since I'd stepped foot in that place. A faint clicking, like someone snapping their fingernails against glass. Slow, measured, coming from deeper in the tents. And for some reason, against all sense, I followed it. The clicking sound drew me deeper into the maze of tents. Each step I took felt like I was moving farther away from the real world, like the desert had closed up behind me, and all that existed now was this silent carnival and me. The tents were arranged in neat rows, their canvas glowing faintly as if the light came from within rather than from bulbs strung outside. Some were striped red and white, others green, yellow, blue. Each one looked freshly staked, the guy lines taut, no sand piled against the edges like you'd expect after a windstorm. It was as though they had been pitched only minutes before I arrived. Perfect, waiting. The clicking came again, sharper this time, like fingernails rapping on glass. I turned toward it. The nearest tent had an entrance flap hanging slightly open. I hesitated, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave. But curiosity, stupid, insistent curiosity, pushed me forward. I pulled the flap aside and peered inside. The air was warmer in there, heavy with that same metallic tang that reminded me of scorched wires or old batteries. Inside, the tent was empty, except for one object set dead center, a glass jar. It stood about 2 feet tall, sealed with a metal lid, and inside it something twitched. The clicking grew louder. I stepped closer, heart hammering. The thing inside wasn't clear at first. It kept shifting, folding in on itself like it didn't have a proper shape. Every time it pressed against the glass, the clicking sound snapped out, sharp and hollow, like a knuckle rapping on a table. I crouched, staring until something in my brain revolted. Whatever was inside that jar wasn't meant to be seen. My mouth went dry. I stumbled back, almost tripping over the tent's threshold. The air outside hit me cold, though the desert night was supposed to be warm. The clicking followed me, soft but insistent, as though the thing in the jar had imprinted itself on the air around me. I walked faster, trying to retrace my steps, but the rows of tents didn't line up the way I remembered. No matter which path I chose, I found myself deeper inside, surrounded by glowing stripes and prizes that had never been won. I turned a corner and froze. In front of me stood a line of mirrors. They weren't carnival mirrors like you'd expect, bent and distorted for fun. These were tall, clean, and perfectly flat. They reflected me with startling clarity, down to the sweat on my neck and the dust streaking my jeans. But the background wasn't right. Behind my reflection, the tents were gone. Instead, I saw open desert, my truck parked alone under the stars. I reached a hand out toward the glass. My reflection did the same, but it was off by half a second, lagging, like a bad video feed. My stomach turned cold. I pulled back. The reflection didn't. It kept its hand pressed to the glass, eyes locked on mine. I bolted, slamming into canvas walls, tearing through guy lines until I burst into an open space. I gasped for air, my chest aching. The Ferris wheel towered above me, turning in silence. And this time, I wasn't imagining it. Every car was full. Shapes sat hunched inside them, perfectly still, silhouettes too dark for the lights to reveal. None of them moved, none of them looked at me, but I knew they were aware, watching. The clicking rose again all around me now, echoing in the empty air. I staggered back, spun, searching for the slope I'd come down, the desert, anything that wasn't this impossible carnival. But the rows of tents stretched endlessly, spinning wheel to my left, prize stalls to my right. No horizon, no sky, just the glowing lights and the suffocating silence. I shouted, desperate, "Where am I?" For a moment, nothing, then a voice. Not from in front of me, not from behind, but inside, somewhere deep in my skull. It wasn't words, not exactly. It was more like the shape of a word forming against bone. But I knew what it meant. Stay. I clapped my hands over my ears as if that would shut it out. My breath came ragged, and the taste of iron filled my mouth. I stumbled forward blindly, tearing at the tent flaps, trying to find an exit. That's when I saw the RV again. It was parked just beyond the edge of the carnival, the same one I'd passed earlier, its windows shattered, paint glowing under the impossible lights. This time, the door was open, and from inside came the faintest glimmer of something familiar, my own headlights. My truck. I didn't think. I ran. My boots skidded in the dust as I tore across the open ground, heart hammering in my throat. The clicking chased me, rising faster, sharper, like hundreds of fingernails snapping in unison. I threw myself into the RV's doorway, expecting the stench of rot or the collapse of rusted metal. Instead, I tumbled forward and hit gravel. Stars blazed above me. Real stars. The Milky Way stretched across the night sky, cold and indifferent. My truck sat 20 feet away, parked on the shoulder, engine dead quiet. The desert was still and wide, exactly as it should be. I lay there on my hands and knees, gasping, my mouth coated with dust. Slowly, the clicking faded until it was gone. When I looked back, the RV was gone too. Just open desert, wind cutting faintly through the brush. And the carnival? Nowhere. Only darkness stretched across the flats where the lights had burned so bright. I staggered to my feet, legs shaking, and climbed into the cab of my truck. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I drove until dawn, until the desert turned gold with light and the radio picked up a station again. I never saw the carnival again. But sometimes, when I'm working under the hood of a car or alone in my RV at night, I hear it. That faint, measured clicking, slow, patient, as if something is reminding me that it's still out there, waiting. I didn't talk about it for weeks, not because I didn't want to, because I couldn't. The whole thing felt brittle, like if I tried to explain it out loud, it would collapse under its own impossibility. I kept working, moving from one desert job to another, driving through the same stretches of Nevada scrub. Every now and then I'd glance out across the flats, half expecting to see those impossible lights again. But the desert stayed dark. Just stars, highway, and the glow of distant towns. Still, the silence of that night clung to me. Out here, you grow used to sound. Even in the middle of nowhere, there's always something. Wind dragging grit across the asphalt, coyotes yipping in the distance, the metallic ping of a cooling engine. Silence, true silence, is unnatural. It's the kind of thing that gnaws at your memory, makes you doubt what you felt. But I hadn't imagined it. I knew that silence. And then, little things began happening. One night, parked at an old campground spur outside of Ely, I woke up to find my RV filled with a faint glow. I thought at first it was dawn that I'd overslept, but when I pulled the curtain back, the desert outside was still black. The glow wasn't coming from the horizon. It was inside. The stove dials, the sink handle, the bolts on the window frames, all of them glowed faintly, as though lit from within. No buzzing, no warmth, just a quiet phosphorescence. My reflection stared back at me in the window glass, pale and wide-eyed. Then I heard it. That clicking. soft, patient, from behind me. I turned so fast I nearly tripped over myself, but the RV was empty. I stood there frozen, waiting for the next sound. Nothing came. The glow faded, slowly like someone dimming a lantern. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. After that, I started noticing patterns. Engines would stall in the exact same way no matter what vehicle I worked on. A clean metallic snap as though something broke deep inside. Radios would cut out mid-song, replaced by silence, not static but silence, before the signal returned. And sometimes I'd catch glimpses. In the mirrors of trucks or RVs I was repairing, I'd see myself standing a half beat behind. Just like in that carnival mirror, always just a fraction of a second off. Always with the faintest shimmer of light hanging around the edge, like carnival bulbs that weren't really there. The worst was near Beatty, a repair call for a stranded family whose camper had died in the desert. I replaced their battery, checked their wiring, got them running again. But when I closed the hood, I noticed the little girl staring past me, out into the flats. "What's she looking at?" her mother asked. I followed the girl's gaze, and my heart stopped. Out there, barely visible in the heat shimmer, were rows of striped tents. Just for a moment. A ripple of color, impossible geometry bending against the desert horizon. Then gone. The girl whispered something I couldn't quite catch. When I asked her what she saw, she just shook her head, clutched her mother's hand, and wouldn't speak to me again. That night, I parked my RV behind an abandoned rest stop. I couldn't eat, couldn't settle. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Every shadow outside the window looked wrong, too sharp, too still. Around midnight, I heard it again, the clicking. Not faint this time, not distant. It was coming from underneath the RV. I sat there, paralyzed, staring at the floor. The sound moved front to back, slow and deliberate, like something crawling along the undercarriage, dragging fingernails across metal. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. Every nerve in me was on fire. Then silence. I forced myself to count to 100 before I dared to move. I opened the door, stepped out into the desert night, and dropped to my knees to look under the RV. Nothing, just sand, dust, and the quiet stretch of highway beyond. But the tracks in the dirt weren't right. Not animal prints, not boot marks, just a series of small indentations, evenly spaced, like someone had been tapping the earth with long, thin rods. They led away from the RV, across the gravel shoulder, and into the dark. I couldn't follow them. Not then. I climbed back inside, locked every door and window, and sat awake until dawn, staring at those prints until the rising sun made them vanish into shadow. And here's the part I hate to admit. I went back. Not on purpose. Not directly. But weeks later, driving the service road out of Tonopah again, I found myself pulling over on the exact same stretch where I'd first seen the lights. My truck idled, my chest tight, the wheels slick under my palms. The desert lay empty before me. But in the back of my mind, I swore I felt it. The pull. The waiting silence. I don't know if I'll ever see it again. But I know this. It sees me. It remembers me. And every time I hear that faint clicking in the dead of night, I wonder if it's opening its doors again, waiting for me to step inside and never come back out. I tried to force myself back into routine. I buried my head in work, told myself the desert heat and long hours were messing with my mind. People break out here. Heat stroke, dehydration, hallucinations. I repeated that to myself every morning when I looked into the mirror and half expected the reflection to lag behind again. But the desert doesn't let go that easily. It remembers. Late August, I got a call from a couple whose RV had blown a rear tire south of Goldfield. They'd limped it onto a dirt spur and killed the engine. When I arrived, the sun was dropping behind the mountains, staining the sky blood orange. The couple looked relieved to see me, too relieved, like they'd been more afraid than a flat tire should have made them. While I swapped the tire, the husband kept glancing at the horizon. Finally, I asked him if he saw something. He just shook his head, jaw tight, and muttered, "Don't stay long." That stuck with me. I finished, waved them on their way, and watched their taillights vanish down the highway. Then I noticed it. The dirt spur they'd pulled into had another set of ruts leading deeper into the flats. Old, half-erased tracks, but still there. They disappeared into the brush, toward nothing. I should have left. Instead, I followed them. I don't know why. Curiosity, stupidity, maybe that quiet pull I'd felt before. My headlights bounced over scrub and stone until the path faded completely. The desert stretched out flat and endless. No lights, no movement, just black horizon under a canopy of stars. And then the silence hit me. Not the normal hush of the desert, not the distant whisper of wind or the faint scratch of insects. No, this was that same unnatural vacuum. Sound stripped away, leaving only the thud of my heart and the rasp of my breath. I killed the engine. The desert glowed. It was faint at first, just a shimmer across the flats. Then, rising from the dark, shapes took form. Tents, rows of them, striped and glowing, identical to before. A Ferris wheel turned slowly, its lights flickering like trapped stars. The midway stretched wide, its stalls brimming with untouched prizes. The carnival had come back, or maybe it had never left. I sat frozen in the cab, nails digging into the wheel. My mouth was dry, my body trembling. I told myself I'd just turn the key back out and drive until sunrise, but I didn't, because I saw movement. Not on the rides, not in the tents, behind the carnival. Shapes, tall and thin, pacing the edges like shadows pulled too long. They didn't move like people. Their strides were stiff, broken, like their joints bent the wrong way. They circled the glow, never stepping into it. I felt it then. The same thing I'd felt before. The invitation, the demand. Stay. The word crawled through my skull, cold and electric. My vision swam. For a moment, I thought about stepping out of the truck, walking down into that silent glow, and letting it swallow me whole. But something broke in me. A surge of panic, stronger than the pull. My hand slapped the ignition, the engine roared to life, and I tore out of there, headlights bouncing wildly, gravel spraying under the tires. In the rearview mirror, the carnival lights flickered, stretched, and then collapsed into nothing. Just desert. Just stars. By the time I hit the highway, I was shaking so hard I could barely keep the truck straight. I don't know how I made it through that night, but I do know this. The carnival isn't tied to one place. It isn't a landmark or a ruin. It comes when it wants, where it wants. It waits for you to be alone, to be tired, to be open to it. And once you've seen it, once you've stepped close enough to smell that metallic tang in the air, it doesn't forget you. It follows. It waits. And sooner or later, when your guard slips, you'll hear it again, that faint, deliberate clicking. And when you do, you'll know it's opening its doors, calling you back. And next time, I don't think I'll come back out. I've thought about leaving Nevada altogether. Selling the RV, selling the truck, heading somewhere green and wet, Oregon, maybe. Somewhere with trees that press close enough you can't see the horizon, somewhere the desert can't reach. But deep down, I know it wouldn't matter. You can't outrun something that doesn't need roads. The silence finds me in places it shouldn't. A few weeks ago, I was working inside a garage in Fallon. Real people around me, air tools whining like radios playing country songs. Then just for a moment, everything cut out. Not the power, lights stayed on, tools still ran, but the sound itself. The wrench in my hand kept spinning, but it was mute, like someone pressed a cosmic mute button on the world. And beneath that nothingness, the clicking started. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, then everything snapped back. Radios blared, tools screamed, voices carried. No one else noticed. Just me, standing there drenched in cold sweat, a wrench slipping from my hands. That's when it hit me. This thing wasn't tethered to a place anymore. It was tethered to me. I started keeping notes, scrawling them in a battered notebook I keep in the glove box. Times, places, what I see, what I hear. The patterns don't make sense, but the more I write, the more it feels like I'm cataloging something real. Like if I stop, it'll consume me whole. And there's something else. Every time I hear the clicking, it's closer. First, it was somewhere deep in the carnival inside a tent. Then it was around me in the open air. Later, underneath the RV. And now, sometimes I wake up at night with the sound coming from the walls. Not outside, inside. It's in my space, learning me. 2 nights ago, I dreamed I was back in the carnival. Only this time I wasn't wandering the midway or staring up at the Ferris wheel. I was in one of the cars. The ride turned slowly, the silence thick, the lights burning too bright. Across from me in the opposite car sat something, a figure. Not quite human, not quite not. I couldn't see its face, but it leaned forward, elbows on its knees, tapping its fingers together. Click, click, click. When I woke, I wasn't in my bed. I was sitting upright in the RV's passenger seat, seatbelt buckled, engine off. My notebook was in my lap, open to a blank page, and scrawled across it in my own handwriting, though I don't remember writing it, were 3 words: "You will stay." I ripped the page out, burned it in the sink, but I can still see the letters when I close my eyes. Jagged. Final. The desert has always been a place people disappear. Cars vanish off the highway. Campers never return from their hikes. Locals shake their heads, chalk it up to heat or bad planning, but I don't believe that anymore. Not after what I've seen. I think the carnival is part of it. Maybe it's been here longer than us. Maybe it isn't even from here at all. But it waits in the gaps, in the emptiness, feeding on the lost. And when it marks you, when it draws you in, there's no clean way out. I escaped twice. I don't think I'll be that lucky a third time. Even now, as I sit here speaking these words, I hear it, soft, steady, measured, a clicking sound that isn't nails or glass or gears. It's something deeper, a rhythm, a countdown. And I know what it means. It means the lights are about to flicker back on. The tents will rise, the wheel will turn, and when they do, I won't be able to look away. I'll step forward, I'll follow the sound, and I'll stay. I don't know how much longer I have before it comes for me outright. Nights blur together now. I can't tell when I'm dreaming and when I'm awake. Sometimes I'll be driving down a highway, sun blazing, trucks roaring past me, and for just a heartbeat, the silence drops in, a thin sheet of soundlessness lasting less than a second. But it's enough. Enough to feel that metallic taste coat the back of my tongue. Enough to hear that single deliberate click echo in my skull. I've started avoiding mirrors. It sounds insane, I know. But every time I catch my reflection, even in something as small as a chrome hubcap, I swear it's off again. That fraction of a second lag. Sometimes it isn't just lagging, it's smiling when I'm not, lips curled in a way mine aren't. Last week, I was brushing my teeth in the RV, and my reflection didn't move the brush the same way. I dropped it in the sink, and my reflection kept going, kept scrubbing. I backed away and turned off the light. And in the darkness, the clicking started again, faint, but steady from inside the mirror. I don't tell people about this. Who would believe me? I'm a grease-stained mechanic who spends too many nights in the desert, too many hours alone. Folks would say it's stress or dehydration or the sun cooking my brain. Maybe they'd be right if it weren't for the things I've seen. A week ago, I stopped at an abandoned pullout along US 95. Broken picnic tables, graffiti on the concrete walls, weeds swallowing the asphalt. I parked the RV, killed the lights, tried to get some sleep. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of children laughing outside. I froze. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. Light, breathless giggles rolling across the desert air. I sat up, every nerve tight. Then I saw it. Faint illumination spilling across the flats. Not headlights, not moonlight, something softer colored, pulsing like carnival bulbs. I stayed inside, paralyzed, staring through the blinds. The laughter rose, mixing with a soft hum, almost like music played on instruments that weren't quite tuned right. And then, just as suddenly, silence again. The glow winked out. I sat there shaking, listening to the blood pound in my ears. In the morning, I stepped outside. The ground was covered in tracks, small, barefoot prints circling the RV, pressed deep into the dirt. And beside them, those same even indentations, rod-like tapping patterns leading back toward the flats. That was the moment I understood something. The carnival doesn't appear. It doesn't vanish. It moves. It moves across the desert like an old traveling show, setting up where no one should be, swallowing whoever wanders close. Maybe it's always been moving. Maybe the reason people disappear out here isn't the heat or bad luck. Maybe they just step through the wrong silence at the wrong time and find themselves staring at a Ferris wheel that shouldn't exist. I've been marked by it. I feel it every time I close my eyes. The desert used to feel wide and empty. Now it feels crowded, pressing, like the whole horizon is leaning closer to listen. I tell myself to fight it, to keep moving, keep working, keep my eyes fixed on real engines, real grease, real bolts under my hands. But there are cracks, like last night. I woke up to the RV rocking gently as though someone was shifting their weight from side to side on the outside. I grabbed the flashlight, yanked open the door, and saw nothing. Just the desert, stretching endless and still. But when I swung the beam across the dirt, the light caught something. Rows of striped fabric, snapping softly in a wind I couldn't feel. The start of a midway. I blinked, and it was gone. Gone but not gone. Because now as I sit here, the sound is with me again. Not faint, not distant. Right here under my skin. Click, click, click. Like it's counting down the moments until I finally give in, until I finally step forward into that waiting silence and let it keep me. And maybe that's how all carnivals end. Not with noise and music and applause, but with silence. A silence so deep it takes you whole. I don't know how to explain the exhaustion that comes from fighting something you can't touch. Every night I lie down telling myself I'll resist, that I won't listen for it, that I won't give it the attention it wants. And every night I hear it anyway. That careful, deliberate clicking. Like a reminder. Like a clock. I used to wonder what it wanted from me. Now I think I know. It doesn't want me to scream or run or even die. It wants me to stay. To step inside its silence and take a seat in one of those empty cars, spinning in circles forever while the desert swallows the world outside. 2 nights ago, I cracked. I woke up to find the RV door wide open. I never leave it that way. The desert air was cold, carrying that metallic tang that stings the back of your throat, and out there on the flats was the glow. Not distant this time. Close. Tents standing like teeth, the Ferris wheel turning, the whole carnival waiting for me. I should have slammed the door shut, but my feet moved first. I stepped out barefoot into the sand. The air pressed heavy, soundless, like I'd walked underwater. The glow pulled me forward, brighter with every step, until I stood once more at the edge of the midway. The tents loomed, perfect and clean. The jars sat lined on tables, shapes twitching inside, tapping at the glass. The prizes stared with glassy eyes, and the wheel turned, every car full. I looked up, and for the first time, the shapes looked back. Hundreds of faces, pale and indistinct, leaned forward, not strangers, not shadows. Faces I knew, the couple from Goldfield, the little girl who wouldn't speak to me, mechanics I'd worked with, strangers whose photos I'd seen on missing posters at gas stations, all of them sitting silently, watching me. The clicking rose, rattling through my chest like a second heartbeat. I wanted to run, I wanted to fight, but my body went slack, heavy as stone. I took one step forward, then another. The wheel slowed, an empty car swung down in front of me, waiting. I reached for it, and then something broke. The night cracked open with the roar of a semi barreling past on the highway, air horns blaring. The sound hit me like a lifeline. The glow faltered. The silence split, and I was back. Standing barefoot beside my RV, the door still open, the desert wide and dark and empty. No tents, no wheel, no faces, just me. I slammed the door, locked it, curled up on the floor, and shook until dawn. That was the closest it's ever come. The closest I've come to staying, and I know it's not done. It doesn't give up. It waits. It moves. It follows. And one night, maybe tomorrow, maybe years from now, it'll catch me in the silence again. When that happens, I don't think I'll be strong enough to turn away. So if you're hearing this, if you're driving through Nevada and you see strange lights out on the flats, don't go to them. Don't follow. Don't listen for the silence. Because once you hear that clicking, it never lets you go. And one day you'll find yourself stepping forward. One day you'll stay. The scream in Red Gorge still lives inside me, rattling my chest when I think back on it like it has been stitched into my lungs. I didn't believe sound could bend the way it did that night. Didn't believe it could loop back on itself, carry weight like a chain, and press down on you until you swore you were about to break. My name is Daniel. I was 34 that summer, and I had been RV camping through the canyons of Utah with 3 close friends, men I'd trusted since college, men I thought I knew better than anyone else. We had taken this trip as a way to disconnect, to let the red rock and the silence of the desert purge whatever poison had been building up inside our city lives. We wanted stillness. We wanted escape. But what we found was something older, something patient, something that knew how to use silence against us until the silence itself screamed. The first time I saw Red Gorge, it wasn't the beauty that struck me. It was the way the air seemed to thicken when we entered. The walls of stone rose up on either side, sheer cliffs painted by centuries of wind, and the sun burned them the color of blood. Our RV, old but sturdy, felt like a toy swallowed by giants. Even the sound of our tires crunching gravel carried wrong, like the echoes stretched and returned too slow. I remember looking at Evan, who was driving, and asking if he heard it too. He shrugged it off, but his jaw was tight. The desert does that to you, makes you doubt what you hear, makes you wonder if the landscape is speaking in a language you don't understand. We parked in a clearing near the mouth of the gorge, a patch of flat ground scarred by old fire pits and rusted beer cans. Others had camped here before. But by the way, those cans were bleached pale, pale by the sun. It hadn't been recent. There was no cell signal, no traffic, nothing but the cliffs around us and the sky stretched above, already cooling into the deep indigo of evening. We set up a small fire, cooked canned chili, and let the canyon walls absorb our laughter. For a while, it felt good, the kind of good you can only feel when you think you're miles away from trouble. But trouble has a way of traveling. It doesn't need roads. The scream came not long after the stars broke out. At first, I thought it was a coyote, high-pitched, drawn-out, piercing enough to make you flinch. But coyotes don't sound like that. Coyotes are wild laughter, fragmented and sharp. This was long, human, drenched in panic, slicing through the gorge like it had been waiting all day for the darkness to carry it. We froze. Forks halfway to our mouths, breaths caught. The fire cracked like a gunshot in the silence afterward. Evan said, That was a woman. His voice trembled like he was ashamed of it. We listened, all of us leaning toward the dark mouth of the gorge as if the sound might come again, as if we needed proof of what we'd just heard. And then it did. The same scream, same pitch, same length. Only this time, when it ended, the echo didn't fade the way it should have. It curved, dragging across the walls, rising back up until it sounded like it was being screamed again, the canyon throwing it at us like a ball we couldn't catch. It looped once, twice, 3 times before dissolving into a ragged whisper we couldn't place. My skin crawled so tight I thought it would tear. There was no denying it. What we had heard wasn't natural. Evan wanted to grab a flashlight and head to the gorge. Said, if someone was hurt, we had a duty to help. And maybe he was right, but none of us moved. The desert can play tricks on you. Sound can carry from miles away. Still, guilt burned in my chest. If someone was truly screaming for help and we sat here too afraid to move, then what did that make us? I told myself it wasn't real. That was the only way to keep from standing and running blindly into those cliffs. We argued in low voices until another scream cut through the night. The same scream, the same loop. But this time, at the tail end of its return, there was a break, like the sound had snagged on something. And in that crack, just for a second, I swore I heard a laugh. Not a cackle, not mocking, but the strained, almost relieved laugh of someone who knows they've been found. My blood turned to ice. Because no matter how much I tried to rationalize the earlier screams, there was no mistaking that tone. That was human. That was alive. We didn't sleep. None of us even pretended to. The fire burned down low, and we sat there, staring into it like men afraid of closing their eyes. Every few minutes, the scream came again, bending, looping, sometimes stretching thinner like it was being pulled apart. I started to notice something else, too. When the sound echoed back, it wasn't always identical. It was close, yes, but not perfect. A little sharper here, a little deeper there. And then, around 3 in the morning, when my nerves were strung so tight I could barely breathe, the scream came again, and it was Evan's voice. I remember the way he jerked upright, the whites of his eyes glowing in the firelight, his mouth opening but no words coming out. We all heard it. We all knew. The gorge had stolen the scream, twisted it, and now it was feeding it back in the shape of one of us. And in that moment, something inside me broke. The last fragile barrier I had between believing this was an illusion and knowing we had stepped into something we couldn't explain. Evan shook his head hard, like he was trying to fling the sound off him, muttering, No, that wasn't me," even though we hadn't accused him. He started packing his bag right then, hands clumsy, shoulders heaving. He wanted to drive out in the dark, like leave the gorge behind, before whatever was out there decided to step closer. But when we tried to talk him down, tell him we couldn't risk the roads at night, I realized I wasn't just afraid of what was in the gorge anymore. I was afraid of Evan, too. Afraid of what the sound was doing to him. To all of us. The desert doesn't need monsters with claws and teeth. Out there, fear itself is enough to tear a man apart. Evan didn't wait for our agreement. By the time his duffel was zipped, he was already stomping toward the RV, his boots scattering gravel like sparks. The headlights blazed against the canyon wall as he twisted the key, throwing monstrous shadows across the rock face. And for one wild moment, I thought he'd actually gun it and vanish down the narrow road that had brought us in. But he didn't. The engine roared, coughed, then cut out. Silence rushed back in, thick and suffocating, as if the gorge itself had swallowed the sound. Evan cursed, slapped the steering wheel, and I swear the canyon answered him with his own voice, flung back at us a heartbeat later, dripping with that same strange distortion the scream carried. Hearing your own words repeated to you, stripped of warmth and spit back colder than you gave them, it does something to your mind. He stumbled out of the RV, face pale and wet with sweat, muttering that it wasn't worth staying. Said the gorge was wrong, that the air itself felt like it was vibrating. His fear was naked, raw, and for the first time I didn't see the friend I'd known since freshman year. I saw a man who might do anything to silence the noise in his head. That was almost worse than the scream itself. We tried to steady him. Jonah, always the peacemaker, put a hand on his shoulder, speaking low, steady, the way you'd talk to a spooked horse. We just wait till dawn. The road's safer then. It's only a few more hours. His words sounded reasonable, too reasonable. In that brittle silence, reason felt like a stranger's voice. And then the gorge screamed again. It tore across us like a whip, the exact same woman's cry we'd first heard, only this time, when the echo folded back, it wasn't one voice. It was many. Layers of the same scream stacked together, overlapping, smearing into something inhuman. And in the middle of it, like a cruel thread woven through, I heard my own name, Daniel. Clear as day, clear as my mother ever said it, ripped from the gorge and sent shivering back into me. I staggered to my feet. My stomach pitched. My friends stared at me as if they'd heard it too, and the terror in their eyes confirmed it. The gorge hadn't just stolen our voices. It knew our names. That was when denial shattered. Whatever this was, it wasn't wind. It wasn't rock. It wasn't anything the desert could explain. The fire sputtered low. I caught myself wishing for the crackle of wood just to break the silence that followed. But silence, I was beginning to learn, was never empty here. In Red Gorge, silence had teeth. Evan refused to sit. He paced the gravel, muttering that it wasn't real, that maybe one of us was pranking the others with a recording. He said it enough times that I almost believed he was trying to convince himself more than us. But I noticed the way his eyes kept darting toward the black split of the gorge, like he expected something to crawl out of it on all fours. Jonah leaned close and whispered, "He's losing it." I didn't answer, because so was I. We decided, no, we agreed without saying it, that no one was going to the gorge. Not tonight. Not with that sound waiting in there like a snare. So we huddled closer to the fire, as if flames could protect us from something we couldn't even name. Every few minutes, the scream would roll again, always the same length, always bending back on itself, sometimes carrying one of our voices, sometimes just a name. By 4 a.m., I couldn't tell which loop had been real and which had been echo. The gorge blurred everything. At one point, I closed my eyes, just for a second, and that's when I heard it. Not the scream, not the loop, but a whisper so close it felt like it was inside my ear. Help me. A woman's voice, weak, trembling, breath brushing my skin. I snapped awake, heart hammering, and my friends stared at me like they'd seen me flinch. I didn't tell them what I'd heard. Some things, if you give them words, become too real. By the time dawn leaked pale light into the gorge, our nerves were shredded. Evan was already by the RV, ready to drive, whether or not the engine wanted to cooperate. But Jonah stopped him. If someone really is in there, he said, and we just leave, what does that make us? The weight of his question pressed on all of us. We'd come here for escape, for adventure, but the desert doesn't let you choose your lessons. And part of me, against all instinct, against every warning my body screamed, part of me needed to know. Needed to see if the gorge was just an echo chamber playing tricks, or if something alive waited inside. So we went. Not far. Just to the mouth of the gorge, where the air cooled and shadows pooled. The gravel crunched under our boots. The sound swallowed almost immediately, as though the rock drank it. And when the scream came again, it wasn't distant. It was close, too close. It rattled my ribs, set the hairs on my arms upright. Jonah raised his flashlight, beam cutting into the throat of the gorge. The walls narrowed, funneled, and I swear they seemed to bend inward like stone leaning down to listen. And there, just for a blink, I thought I saw movement. A pale flicker, like cloth, vanishing deeper in. We froze. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to run, to never set foot beyond that threshold. But Evan, he took one step forward. Just one. And the gorge answered with his voice, screaming, looping, tearing itself apart as it flung his sound back at him. He stumbled, eyes wild. That's me. That's me. And maybe the worst part was realizing he wasn't wrong. The gorge wasn't just repeating us. It was recording us, twisting us, returning us as something else. The desert doesn't need a face to haunt you. Sometimes all it needs is your own. Caleb had been quiet through the night, the way he always got when things went sideways, shoulders rounded, eyes narrowed, thinking 6 moves ahead while the rest of us just tried not to fall apart. He finally spoke at the threshold, voice low and gravelly from smoke and no sleep. We set a turn-back time, 30 minutes in. If we don't see anyone, we come back and drive out as soon as the sun's high. He looked from me to Jonah to Evan, waiting for one of us to argue so he could feel the weight of pushback and measure it against the risk. None of us did. He nodded once, like he'd just tied off a knot. Stay close. If you lose sight of us, plant and yell. Do not keep walking. I could feel my heartbeat in the pads of my fingers as we stepped into the throat of Red Gorge. The air changed immediately, cooler, denser, like a refrigerated room. The smell shifted too. Sun-cooked dust gave way to wet stone and an iron tang that lived at the back of the nose. Every footstep made a soft, damped thud, and the walls gathered our sounds and folded them over us until we couldn't tell which were ours and which were theirs. I'd read about this kind of thing once, flutter echoes, standing waves, but nobody tells you how a place like this also learns your breathing, memorizes the friction of your jacket sleeve, and returns it to you a second later from behind your ear. Hey, Jonah called, voice steady, the beam of his flashlight glancing off Micah and Micah glancing right back. If you can hear us, we're here to help. Stay put and yell. The canyon took him like a mouth takes a name. It came back thinner, then thicker, then thinner again. A smear of Jonah in layers, as if 3 versions of him were shouting in parallel universes a fraction of a second apart. The hairs along my forearms prickled and didn't lie back down. Caleb kept us oriented with small, ordinary rituals. Rituals are how you stay sane when the world starts to slide. He scratched an arrow into the sandy crust with his boot at each bend. He made us stop and mark time. 8 minutes in. He made us do boring things like sip water and adjust straps just to keep our hands busy with tasks that still made sense. None of it made the gorge friendlier, but it helped pull our minds back from the edge. "Look," Evan said, pointing with his chin. A piece of fluorescent flagging fluttered from a low mesquite that had somehow rooted itself in a seam of silt. It was the color of hazard vests, wind-faded, but still a tiny, defiant wound of orange in all the red. "Trail crew?" he asked, but it sounded like a plea. Jonah reached up and pinched it between his fingers. Could be. Could be someone marked the way in." He didn't add the next part. People usually mark the way out. We rounded a dogleg where the walls pinched so close our shoulders brushed stone. As my jacket rasped, the gorge handed me that sound from ahead, and for a heartbeat I truly believed someone else was walking toward us in a copy of my clothes. I thought of my sister then, of the quarry behind our house when we were kids, the echo games we used to play, how she'd cup her hands and shout my name and laugh when it came back at us twice, once from the cliff, once from the water. The last time I'd heard her voice in a place like this, there hadn't been laughter, just a single frightened sound when she slipped. My mind slammed the door on that memory so hard I felt it in my teeth. Another door in a different life had been left open too long, and I had learned to keep my hands on the knob. 20 minutes, Caleb said. He checked his watch and didn't meet our eyes. We go 10 more, then we turn. We can't leave if someone's in here, Evan said, and there was a new thread in his voice, something like anger braided with shame. We can't. No one's leaving anyone, Jonah said. We're not in the business of dying for a guess either. The gorge answered Jonah with a sigh, no other word for it, as if the place itself was tired of our talk. Then the scream came. It ripped across us from everywhere at once, and in the instant before the echo built, I would have sworn it was in front of us, 10 yards away, invisible. But when it came back, the loops formed a chain of perfect circles that overlapped our bodies, and in the third circle, it changed. Jonah, it said, wrapped in that same breathless terror, a woman pleading and naming as if the name itself might pull her up a ledge. Jonah's mouth opened, then closed. His knuckles went white around the flashlight. We keep moving, he said, and I wanted to hug him for the way he didn't crumble. We found scratches on the sandstone a few minutes later, high up on the right wall, parallel lines, 4 at a slant, then a 5th crossing them like a tally. Human height, fresh edges. A hand had dragged something metal here recently. Below the marks, a smear of blackened soot traced a shallow overhang. A windbreak for a cold night, maybe. A place to sit and wait and decide whether to scream again. "Hello?" I called. My voice sounded thin, embarrassed, the way voices do when you speak in a church without meaning to. "If you can hear me, don't move. We're coming." The gorge tried me on like a coat. It threw back my words in a deeper register, then higher, then the same, like it was measuring which version of me fit best. 28 minutes, Caleb said, quietly. 2 more. Evan stepped ahead, the toe of his boot edging past the half-lit in the sand where Caleb had drawn the last arrow. "I'm not turning around." "You don't walk alone," Caleb said, flat. "Not in here." "I'm not alone," Evan said, and he meant it. I could hear it. The gorge had gotten inside him, convinced him there was someone just around the bend who needed him specifically. It's a hard thing to fight in a decent man, the reflex to help. The path choked down to a slot narrow enough that we had to go sideways. The stone was cool against my chest, warmer against my back where the sun finally started to reach. It smelled like rain even though the sky was crisp and without a cloud. Somewhere far above, a raven cawed, and that single normal sound hit me like water in a desert. I clung to it. I counted seconds between the scream cycles like I could turn them into math. 37, 37 again, 36, 37. I told myself the pattern mattered because if the pattern mattered, I was still in a world where cause and effect held. "Stop," Jonah said softly, the way you say it when you spot a rattler and you don't want the person in front to move their foot onto its head. He aimed his light a few degrees down. The floor of the slot dipped abruptly into a dark, oval hole where fluvial water had eaten out a pocket. You could step into that at night and break your leg before your scream finished leaving your throat. Left side, toes against the wall. We slid past, breath shallow, each of us listening for the tiny slip that would mean someone had found gravity the hard way. I was last. As I hugged the wall, I felt a hair snag under my palm. I peeled it off the stone without meaning to. A long strand, brittle, sun-bleached at the end. I pinched it between forefinger and thumb as if it were poisonous, and for the rest of that minute, I couldn't make myself let go. 30 minutes. We stopped in a pocket where the slot widened again into a small amphitheater, a bowl of stone with a ceiling open to a perfect rectangle of sky. The acoustics sharpened here. If you whispered, you could hear the sibilants unwrap. If you swallowed, the click of your throat sounded like it belonged to someone behind you. "This is the turn," Caleb said. He didn't have to look at his watch. "We go back, regroup, call for help once we're out past the bluff." The gorge waited, a patient animal. 5 minutes, Evan said. 5, please. His eyes shone too bright. The skin at his temples was damp, the way a man looks when he's trying to hold his breath for longer than his lungs were made for. Caleb stared at him and then, God help us, gave a single tiny nod. 5, no more. We took 3 steps into the next run, and the scream tore the sky in half. It was the woman again, only not, pitched lower, then higher midstream, as if something were twisting the muscle of her throat while she cried. It looped, and in the return, I heard my own voice for the first time. Not just the shape of it, words. One word, barked, desperate, a warning, run. The sound hit me from the future and dropped into the present like a stone. I hadn't said it. Not yet. I knew this in the way you know your own name, but hearing it fell through me like a trapdoor. My mouth opened of its own accord and the word ripped out, run. And it fit perfectly into the notch where the echo had been waiting for it. The world shuddered, not physically, but along the seam where time keeps most of us sane. Move, Caleb snapped, already turning, shoving Jonah and Evan back the way we'd come. I didn't have to be told twice. Something above us cracked. Soft at first, like ice thinking about breaking, then a low percussion built that lived in the bones more than in the ears. We sprinted the way you sprint when there's no room to swing your elbows and your shoulder scrapes and your pack catches and none of it matters because the sound overhead is getting heavier. The first stone fell like an accusation right where we'd been standing seconds earlier. A fist-sized chunk exploded against the floor, and the echo of it broke apart into a scatter of little echoes that went running in all directions like children. Another fell, then another. Fine red dust poured down in sheets and turned the air into something that fought back when you tried to breathe. We stumbled past the oval hole, boots sliding, hands slapping stone for balance, the gorge flinging our grunts and curses into shapes that sounded like other men shouting from just out of sight. "Keep your left toes on the wall," Jonah yelled, and I heard him say it again from ahead and behind and right in my ear. 3 Jonahs trying to keep us alive. Evan's shoulder slammed mine, and for a moment we were wedged together, breath ragged, and in that tiny, awful pause, the gorge whispered my name in my sister's voice. I ripped free with a sound I don't ever want to hear again. We burst back into the amphitheater pocket just as a larger slab somewhere up the slot let go with a sound like a door ripping off its hinges. The boom rolled through us and kept going, ran on down the gorge and didn't come back. For a heartbeat, the scream stopped. The loops died. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was a held breath, the kind living things take before they decide what they're going to do next. We staggered into the widening bowl of the amphitheater, coughing up dust, hands clawing at the air as if it could be peeled back for something cleaner. My throat burned raw, but what chilled me more was the silence that followed the collapse. It wasn't relief. It wasn't peace. It was expectation. The canyon had gone still the way a predator goes still, the way a snake coils tight before striking. Caleb bent over, palms on his knees, gasping hard. His eyes darted to the sky rectangle above us like he was measuring if he could climb it barehanded. Jonah sat against the wall, chest heaving, red grit streaked with sweat down his cheeks. Evan paced in circles, muttering to himself, words cut short as if the gorge might steal them if he let them out whole. My own heartbeat filled my ears until I couldn't tell if it was inside me or another sound the canyon had claimed. Then the echo came back. Not the scream, not the usual looping terror, but our own chaos. Every cough, every shout from the sprint, every scrape of stone and slap of boots, all layered and played back in a staggered cascade. It didn't sound like us anymore. It sounded like a crowd. Hundreds of strangers hidden behind the walls, imitating us, mocking us. "Stop," Caleb rasped, his voice ragged from dust. "We stop moving. We don't give it more." So we froze, and for a moment the canyon froze with us. That was when we heard it. Footsteps, not echoes this time, not distortions. Real, measured footfalls somewhere deeper in the gorge. Crunch, 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 each one landing in the silence like a deliberate choice. I felt my stomach flip and my skin turn to ice. Whoever, or whatever it was, it walked as if it had all the time in the world. Evan jolted, his face lighting up like he'd been waiting for this. "Someone's there. I told you. We can't just run." Caleb grabbed his arm before he could bolt. "Think. If they're alive, they'd call back when we shouted. If they're alive, they'd want help. Why would they stay silent?" But Evan shook him off, wild-eyed, desperation turning his features sharp. "You don't understand. She needs me." The way he said it made my blood run cold. He didn't say someone. He didn't even say the woman. He said she, like he already knew her, like the gorge had whispered secrets to him in the hours we weren't listening. Before we could stop him, he was moving, flashlight beam jerking wildly against the red stone as he pushed into the throat of the canyon again. His voice echoed back as he called, "We're here! We're coming!" Each repetition sounded less like him and more like the gorge trying on his skin. "God damn it!" Caleb hissed, shoving his pack on and chasing after him. Jonah pushed off the wall and followed. My legs felt nailed down, but the thought of staying alone in that amphitheater made me break them free. I ran last, the hair I'd found earlier still twisted in my fist like a talisman. We plunged back into the narrowing slot. Dust still hung in the air, sparkling faintly in the shafts of weak daylight that managed to reach down. Evan's beam bobbed ahead, fast and frantic. He called again, "Hello? Hello?" The gorge flung it back threefold, each one overlapping, each one leaning toward a laugh. We caught him at the next bend. He stood frozen, his light locked on something ahead. At first, I thought it was just the rock, strange patterns of erosion, shadows stretched by uneven walls. But then I saw it. A figure, not clear, not full, just a silhouette pressed into the stone. It was shaped like a woman, hair trailing down, arms out, body slightly bent as though mid-run. Only she wasn't moving. She was part of the wall, a darker red etched into lighter red, like someone had carved her outline and filled it in with ash. "She's here," Evan whispered, and I'll never forget the way his voice cracked on it, like awe, like heartbreak, like worship. Jonah yanked at his arm. She's not real, Eve. It's a stain, a mineral pattern." But even as he said it, I knew he didn't believe himself, because the longer you looked, the more the details sharpened. The angle of a cheekbone, the curve of a hand frozen mid-reach, the way the mouth was open, teeth caught in the scream we'd been hearing all night. The gorge exhaled. That's what it felt like. One long, heavy breath sliding over our skin. The figure seemed to shiver just once, as if stone could remember how to move. And then the scream came again, bursting from the silhouette itself, not around us, not behind, but straight from the wall where she was trapped. Evan broke. He lunged forward, hands out as if he could pull her free. Caleb and Jonah tackled him before he reached the wall, all three of them crashing into the dust, their shouts folding back immediately, replaying in distorted harmony until it sounded like a war was happening right there in that narrow slot. I stood back, frozen, the scream still pouring out of the rock woman's mouth, the echo looping until I couldn't tell where one cycle ended and the next began. And then, Beneath all of it, quieter, a whisper just for me. Daniel. It was her voice again. My sister's. The gorge hadn't just stolen us, it had been listening longer than we knew. Caleb and Jonah wrestled Evan into the dust, pinning his wrists while he kicked, wild and breathless, like a caught animal willing to tear its own skin to get free. The rock woman's mouth, just a dark hollow in the stone, kept releasing that engulfing scream, and every time it looped back, it picked up a new texture, the way wind picks up sand. I couldn't stop staring at the outline of her teeth carved in iron-stained sandstone. Teeth. Whoever had first walked past this wall and seen a person trapped there had given the rest of us a script to read from. The desert loves a script. It waits for us to bring it words so it can throw them back soaked in something we don't have a name for. Evan, look at me, Caleb said, breathing hard, lips dusted red. He kept his forearm across Evan's chest and held his jaw in a steady grip. There's no person. It's stone. You're hearing the place use you? Listen to my voice? Listen. His face was inches from Evan's. I watched his pupils, the way they kept checking left, right, calculus running behind his eyes as if he were taking measurements on a collapse site. She knows me, Evan gasped. You didn't hear the way she said my name. He bucked again. Jonah shifted his weight, grounding a knee, mumbling, We've got you. Stay with us, man. Stay. He was trying to keep the words plain, unpoetic, ungifted, the kind that don't echo as badly. You learn that quick out here. The canyon punishes flourish. The whisper came again, threading under the scream like a hidden river. Daniel. Softer, coaxing. The exact tone my sister had used the night she dared me to jump with her into the quarry after dark. Half teasing, half pleading, the sound older siblings have when they already know you'll say yes. I had said yes that night. We had cut through water black as oil, and I came up, and she didn't. The scream that followed had been mine. The echoes had been the cliffs. The memory had been something I learned to seal in a box and stack other boxes on top. Red Gorge was prying the lids up with a fingertip. It's not her, I said out loud to the wall, to myself. My voice cracked on the knot. The gorge caught that crack and turned it into a splitting sound above us, a tiny, brittle noise that made all of us flinch and look up as if a slab might let go again. Caleb released Evan slowly, hands open, palms out, buying trust with his posture. We're leaving this pocket, he said. Now. The longer we stand in front of this thing, the more it'll write us into it. He meant the stain, but he meant the narrative too. It's an old trick of the desert. Give you a figure to project on until you forget there are other ways to read the land. Back the way we came, Jonah said. He flicked the beam to the last scratch arrow we'd made, and then to the next bend where the slot pinched. He was doing what good mountain people do, reminding us of the simple sequence when the mind starts to fray. We moved as a unit. I let my hands skim the wall as we passed the etched figure, felt the false smoothness of varnish under my fingers, manganese and clay polished by 1,000 hands. Heat radiated from the rock like skin after a fever. The mouth of the woman, shaped by minerals and the accidents of drip lines, seemed to breathe as a gust touched it. For a second, I felt the warmth of a living exhale across my knuckles. I snatched my hand back and wiped it on my jeans as if I'd touched a stove. We threaded the tight slot sideways. Dust hissed down. I could taste metal on my tongue. Jonah started counting low under his breath, a monotone metronome, more for us than for time. 1, 2, 3. I knew what he was doing because I had been doing it too, making rhythm the thing we followed instead of the scream. The loops had run at 37 seconds when I'd been tracking them, 36 once. The next arrived on 35, a hair early, and that wrongness crawled under my nails. The echo had heard me counting, learned my pace, and stepped sideways just to prove it could. At the oval hole, we went toes on stone, left shoulders dragging the way we had before. Evan tried to glance down into it. Caleb touched the back of his neck with 2 fingers, firm, fatherly, a boundary that said, keep your head. We slipped past, one by one. When my palm flattened to the wall, a grain of quartz under my skin felt like a pulse that didn't belong to me. The hair I'd been holding since the first pinch point was still wound around my fingers. I hadn't realized that until it bit when I clenched. I unwound it and let it go. It snagged on a nub of sandstone and hung there, a line in the air, a tiny human filament trying to claim the rock. It looked pathetic, then it looked like a fuse. We hit the dogleg. The flagging tape by the mesquite fluttered, barely, although no draft touched my cheek. It made the smallest sound, a whisper you could only hear if you were waiting for the canyon to say something new. I was waiting. The tape moved again. Not wind. Something deeper in the gorge, exhaling and drawing the air to us like a lung. We need to shorten the echoes, Jonah said. Break the loop. He took the bandana from his pocket and tied it over his mouth and nose, then retied it because his hands wanted a job. Daniel, your phone. Record for 30 seconds. Just point at the wall and clap. Let's see what the canyon throws back when the impulse is ours, not hers. It was a silly plan, a desperate plan, which made it perfect. I yanked my phone, thumb shaking. A red dot bloomed. I faced a flat panel of rock and clapped hard. Once, twice, 3, 4. My palms stung. The sound came back as distinct pips, then smeared into a long metallic ribbon, then separated again, not because of the shape of the wall, but because the canyon was answering in layers like a person harmonizing with themselves. On the 5th clap, I heard something nested under the returns. Not a clap, a word. My word. Stop. Clean and clipped, the way I say it when I cut my dog off before she noses past the front step. I hadn't spoken. Yet, the version of me inside the loop had. Okay, Caleb said, voice tight but steady. We're done here. He put his hand on the back of my arm, the way he had with Evan, and turned me. Eyes on my shoulders. Do not look at the walls. Left toes on the arrows. We're walking out of this red throat, one step after another, and we're not stopping for stories. We moved. The gorge led us. It led us for 20 steps, then 30. Our breath found a shared cadence. 4 men trying to make their bodies uninteresting to something that fed on attention. The scream didn't come. The silence did. I hated the silence more than the scream. It felt like being watched by a field full of deer that haven't decided whether to bolt. At the mouth of the slot, the light expanded. A breeze lifted a curl of dust. The amphitheater bowl was behind us now. The wider wash ahead waited with the blessed ordinary mosaic of hoof prints, bird tracks, our own boot marks from the morning. Caleb slowed but didn't stop. Don't trust tracks, he said. Trust the slope. Trust the way water wants to go. We angled where the sandy floor gentled toward the open, toward sky, the color of a clean blade. Guys, Evan said, voice small. He wasn't looking at the exit. He was staring over his shoulder at the slot we'd left, eyes big as water. She's in pain. A thin sound uncoiled from the shadows. Not the scream. A sob. Soft, human, nothing theatrical about it. It was a sound I knew in my bones because I had made it on a midnight kitchen floor when no one was around to hear. If the gorge had thrown the scream like a weapon, it offered the sob like a cup. I felt my body lean toward it before my head could say no. Keep walking, Caleb said. He didn't turn. We followed the line his spine drew through the air. I thought we might do it. I thought we might outrun whatever wanted our voices. Daniel, my sister said from behind me, plain as the day we buried her. Don't leave me. I stopped. It wasn't a decision. It was an override. Everything that makes a person, the bone, the blood, the old loyalty that outlives the living, stiffened and turned me around. The slot yawned like a mouth that's polite until you step close. I took a step without feeling my foot hit the ground. Daniel. Closer. Tired. Please. My throat closed. I'm here, I said, and I hated myself for how quickly it came. The word darted into the slot and came back with the roughness the canyon gives things, as if I had spoken after crying for hours. I waited to hear it from the future. The second version, the one the gorge would deliver a beat before I could say it. It didn't come. Instead, a different voice arrived, low and deliberate. Mine again, speaking a sentence I had not formed. If you go to her, you will not come back. I looked at Caleb. He held my gaze without blinking. He had heard it too. He didn't plead. He just shared the weight of the moment with me and let it sit on the narrow shelf of air between us. Evan eased a step backward toward the slot while we were looking at each other. Jonah saw the shift, caught his sleeve, and Evan twisted free, not violently. Exactly, but with purpose that cares more about the thing ahead than the hands on his arm. She knows me, he said again, a cracked record with one groove dug deeper than all the others. He pointed into the slot. You don't hear it because it's not calling you. Maybe that's worse, Jonah said. Maybe that's exactly the point. The canyon made a decision for us. The scream came back all at once and all around, but only at a whisper's volume, so low you had to lean forward to prove to yourself it was real. It threaded the air like a wire and hooked itself into the soft part under my breastbone where grief lives. In the center of it, one of our names folded and unfolded, soft as if spoken through a hand pressed to a mouth. Not Evan's this time. Mine. I took a step toward the dark. My boot hit a line of gravel and rolled, and the tiny inconvenience of nearly twisting my ankle snapped a part of me awake. My sister had no breath left inside this throat of stone. She had no voice. The desert had a library of us, and it was pulling volumes. It had worn the shape of need and tried it on us one at a time. It would keep trying, patient as geology. No, I said. The word tasted like iron. No. I reached for Evan and felt him resist, and then for the first time since the engine had coughed and died in the night, I saw him hesitate. He heard the word in a different register. Mine, but also his future self's. The looped voice that had warned me seconds ahead of time before the rockfall. For a flicker, the desert's magic cut both ways. The canyon had given us back a version of ourselves we could choose to believe. Please, I told him. Walk. We turned. The wash opened. The walls stepped back an inch, then another. The sun landed on my face like something human and uncomplicated. Dust clung to my tongue, and I wanted to laugh at how grateful I was for dust. We took 10 steps in the light, then 11. I could feel the gorge behind the hinge of my jaw like a second pulse. At 12 steps, the canyon spoke once more, clear and ordinary, the way a person might call down a hallway. It used Jonah's voice and laced it with a fear I had never heard in him. Daniel, don't leave me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. If I did, the gorge would get to write me next. I let Caleb's shoulder fill my vision, and I followed it until the mouth of Red Gorge was finally there, open, untroubled, a seam in the rock we could step through if we only remembered how to keep going. The moment the sun broke over the rim of Red Gorge and touched the dirt road, the silence fractured. Not with another scream, not with another echo, but with the ragged chorus of our own lungs finally remembering how to breathe. The light was raw and hot, spilling down the stone like molten metal, and it washed the canyon's mouth into something almost ordinary again. Almost. Evan stumbled first, collapsing against the RV like he was trying to bury himself inside the steel. His fingers scraped over the handle, pulling at it again and again, as though the locked door had somehow become salvation. Jonah leaned against the front fender, hands trembling so violently he dropped his flashlight and let it lie in the gravel. Caleb didn't lean. He just stood, rigid, staring back into the shadowed throat we had escaped from. His jaw ticked, once, like he was chewing on the fact that stone had tried to speak with our voices and nearly convinced us to walk willingly into it. I dropped to my knees. My legs weren't broken, but something inside them had been hollowed out. My palms pressed against the earth, gritty and hot, and I whispered one word that had lived in me since the quarry years ago. Why? It wasn't meant for my friends. It wasn't even meant for my sister. It was meant for whatever intelligence sat in that gorge, collecting names and looping screams, patient as tectonics. The wind carried nothing back, only a smear of dust lifting off the road and the distant call of a crow. For a long while we didn't speak. The morning bled into noon. We drank water in silence, each swallow an act of defiance against the dry coil that still wound through our throats. When the RV finally coughed alive on the third crank of the key, I wanted to cry from relief, But the relief curdled almost instantly because I realized something. The sound of the engine didn't echo. Not once. Not against those sheer red walls. It was as if the gorge had already learned its growl, already filed it away, and saw no reason to return it to us. We drove. Gravel popped beneath the tires. The gorge narrowed in the rear view until it was just a seam of shadow, and then it was gone. But not gone. Never gone. Evan sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window with the slack focus of someone who had lost too much in a single night. Once he whispered something I almost didn't catch. She knew my name. He said it without accusation, without pride, just the flat tone of truth as he now carried it. Jonah tried to answer him, but the words broke on his tongue. How do you argue with someone who has been named by a canyon? We camped again that night, but not in Red Gorge. We pulled into a scrubland rest site 20 miles out where the air was thinner and the stone was gray instead of red. Still, when we stepped out under the swollen stars, the silence seemed too heavy, too knowing. None of us dared strike up a fire. We ate cold beans from a can, our flashlights turned low, listening for a scream that never came. But in the absence of it, we heard something worse, ourselves. Every cough, every mutter, every creak of a boot sole against dirt seemed sharpened, exaggerated, as though the gorge had tuned our ears differently. Once, when Jonah laughed under his breath at some joke he half muttered, Evan flinched so hard he dropped his can. Don't, he snapped. Don't let it take your voice again. The words were wild, but none of us corrected him. We lasted 2 days like that, moving further from the gorge, but never from the memory of it. On the third day, Jonah broke the silence over breakfast. Sound doesn't do that on its own, he said, eyes fixed on the horizon. Not just echo, not just acoustics. That was something else. He looked at me then, as though I had an answer. Maybe because I had been called too, because it had spoken my name in my sister's voice. I wanted to tell him it was just geology, a trick of stone. I wanted to, but the truth was heavier. The truth was that when the gorge had said my name, it had not felt like a trick. It had felt like a hand, reaching across years and grief and memory, curling around me with perfect precision. That night, I dreamed of the quarry again. I dreamed of my sister's scream, looping back and forth across the cliffs, only now it carried the distortion of Red Gorge. And in the dream, when I dove into the black water after her, she wasn't there. Instead, the canyon was. Red walls, iron veins, a mouth yawning open, and her voice came from inside it, soft, almost tender. You came back. I woke with my throat raw, and the others staring at me like I had screamed in my sleep. Maybe I had. We didn't talk about Red Gorge again after that. Not out loud, but it followed us. It followed in the way Evan stopped answering the phone when he was home alone. In the way Jonah, who used to be the most easygoing of us, jumped whenever his name was called from another room. In the way Caleb avoided mirrors because he swore sometimes he heard a delayed version of his own voice whispering just behind the glass. As for me, I started recording, not with fancy equipment, not with some plan to prove anything, just on my phone. I'd clap, speak, sing under my breath, then play it back, listen for the seam. I told myself I was listening for peace of mind, but really, I was listening for her, for the version of my sister that Canyon had convinced me was still out there, for the voice that had said my name. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear it, just faintly, not enough to convince anyone else, but enough to convince me. The desert teaches you lessons the hard way. Ours was simple, brutal, unforgettable. Not every scream you hear in the wilderness belongs to someone who can be saved. Sometimes it belongs to the land itself, and if you chase it, it will keep you. We left Red Gorge behind, but Red Gorge didn't leave us. Its scream loops still, whether in stone or in memory, and sometimes, God help me, I think it's still rewriting my voice each time I speak, because every once in a while when I say my own name out loud, it doesn't sound like mine anymore. I used to think horror ended when the road opened, when the sky stretched wide again and you could see horizon on every side. I used to think that if you could just get enough distance between yourself and the place that nearly took you, You'd eventually breathe different air that hadn't been turned inside out by echoes. But distance doesn't dilute memory. It sharpens it. Every mile we put between ourselves and Red Gorge seemed to magnify the sound we carried out of it until it lived not in the canyon anymore, but inside us. Months passed. We went home to our separate lives, dropped back into jobs and relationships, pretending to our families that the trip had been uneventful. Just dessert, I said when my brother asked. Just red rocks and stars. My mouth shaped the lie, but my teeth clenched around it. The scream was there when I brushed my teeth, when I stood at the microwave, when I tried to fall asleep beside the hum of the fridge. It lived between the ticks of ordinary sound. The others carried it too. Evan stopped coming to our weekly calls, answering texts only with 1 or 2 words. Jonah avoided tunnels when he drove, even highway underpasses, as if he feared that if the sound bounced back at him in a low enough arc, it would recognize him and call his name again. Caleb took it worst in silence. He had always been our steady one, the one who believed everything could be managed with rules and steps and small practical acts. But when I visited him that fall, his apartment was covered in whiteboards, each marked with measurements, times, variables. If we understand the loop cycle, he said quietly, we might understand its pattern. And if we understand the pattern, maybe we can control it. His eyes burned with sleepless obsession, and I realized the Gorge had rewritten him into an engineer of madness. As for me, I kept dreaming. Night after night, my sister's voice threaded through my sleep. Sometimes she screamed. Sometimes she whispered. Sometimes she just said my name over and over like she was afraid I'd forget it. Waking became the strangest part of my day. I'd sit on the edge of my bed, feet flat against the carpet, waiting to hear if my own name would come back to me from the corners of my room. One evening, while driving home, I caught myself speaking aloud, testing. I said, "Daniel," the way you might test a mic. My voice bounced in the windshield, muffled by the dash, and then, fainter than I wanted to believe, I heard it a second time. Not quite mine, not quite foreign, just bent. I pulled the car over, heart pounding, staring at the empty street around me. Nothing but night. Nothing but the ticking engine. Still, I couldn't shake the conviction that Red Gorge had followed me home, that maybe it didn't need stone walls at all. Maybe all it needed was the hook of a name and the weak spot where grief and guilt already lived. You can't live like that forever. Fear eats, but so does life. Eventually, you have to choose which one you'll feed. I started walking at dawn, headphones in, filling my ears with music loud enough to drown out the faintest echo. I started talking with my brother more, not about the Gorge, but about anything else. Work, old movies, the weather. I forced myself to believe that ordinary sound could be louder than what we had carried out. And little by little, I realized something. Red Gorge hadn't given me my sister back. It had given me myself, raw and unmasked, stripped of all the walls I had built around her memory. The scream wasn't just terror, it was memory amplified until I couldn't ignore it. Until I was forced to face it. There's an ugly kind of grace in that. Months later, I met Caleb and Jonah again, halfway between our homes, at a diner with 2 bright lights and coffee that tasted like ash. Evan never came. He'd moved somewhere north, off the grid, last we'd heard. We sat in that booth, 3 men carrying the same canyon in our ribs, and for the first time, we said it out loud. Not the scream. We didn't try to imitate that. But the truth. How close we'd come to staying. How it had used the voices of the people we loved most. How it had almost convinced us that salvation was hiding in stone. Talking didn't exorcise it, but it reminded us that we weren't alone in what we carried. That matters. I don't think I'll ever step foot near Red Gorge again. Some places you survive once. Going back would be arrogance, and arrogance is the same as an invitation. But I'll tell the story. I'll tell it so others know what waits out there. Because fear isn't meant to be hoarded, it's meant to be shared. A torch passed so the next traveler can see where not to step. If you ever find yourself camping in Utah and you hear a scream roll endlessly through the stone, remember this. Not every sound is a call for help. Sometimes it's a canyon testing you, learning your voice, waiting to see if you'll offer it your name. When it happens, if it happens, don't answer. Don't turn. Don't step toward the mouth of the gorge. Keep walking, even if every cell in your body trembles with recognition. Keep walking until the sky opens again and the silence is your own. Because I promise you this, once Red Gorge knows your name, it never forgets. And if you give it your voice, it will keep it forever. And that is why every time I speak now, I remind myself, this voice belongs to me, not to the gorge, not to the echoes, to me. I worked boats on the Mississippi my whole life, though I wouldn't say I loved it. I didn't inherit some grand romance about the river the way other men in my family did. To me, the river was just where the work was. My father patched hulls for shrimpers in Plaquemines Parish. My uncle welded skiffs and ran salvage jobs after storms. I ended up somewhere in between, a boat repairman who spent more time with sheet metal and resin than with my own wife. The Delta was my workshop. Muddy slips where barges moored half-rotten, backwater creeks where airboats snapped reeds, dry docks where hurricanes had tossed hulls like matchsticks. What I remember most wasn't the water, but the sound of it. The Mississippi never goes silent. At night, even when the surface looks still, it's muttering underneath. Eddies colliding, hidden logs rolling, currents beating the hull like fists. The sound seeps into you, makes you dream in its rhythm. Sometimes I'd wake in my trailer after a long day in the yard, still hearing the water tapping like a bass drum under my pillow. That rhythm I could live with. But what came later, that low, drawn-out hum I first noticed one July night in 2016, was something different, something that didn't belong. I was working late in a yard south of Venice, just a patch of gravel along a bend where the channel widened. The owner let me rent space cheap if I fixed his shrimping boat whenever it busted, which was often. I'd brought my RV down there, parked it among stacks of fiberglass scraps and rusting barrels, since it saved me the commute back north. The air smelled like resin, hot metal, and the faint sweetness of river mud baking in the sun. That night I couldn't sleep. The heat was clinging even after midnight. The generator was down, so no air conditioning, just a box fan pushing wet air around. I stepped outside in my boots, walked toward the dock to cool off. The river was wide and still, its skin glinting under the moon. Somewhere far out, a tug groaned, its light a weak yellow pulse on the horizon. That's when I heard it. It started low, a vibration more than a tone, almost like when a massive freighter's engines churn underwater. But there was no freighter. It came in pulses, long, drawn hums that rose and faded, stretched over the water like something alive was exhaling. It wasn't the groan of steel. It wasn't machinery. It was organic. I froze on the dock, trying to pin it down. The sound wasn't traveling from one direction. It was everywhere, the whole surface of the river carrying it like a drumhead. For a moment, I thought maybe I was imagining it, ear-ringing, fatigue. But when I bent down close to the water, I felt the vibration pass through the boards beneath my palms, and something in me stirred. Not fear exactly, not yet, more like recognition. It sounded like singing, not words, not even a melody. But that hum carried cadence as though it wanted to be followed. It would swell, dip, pause like it was waiting for a response. And I swear, I felt it in my chest the way you feel music when it's too loud. It pressed against my ribs. I don't know how long I stood there, listening. My head felt light, like I hadn't eaten in a day. When I finally looked down, my boots were wet. I had stepped forward almost into the river itself without realizing. My toes had touched the slick algae line where the dock ended. That shook me awake enough to stagger back. The hum ceased as soon as I did. I walked back to the RV on shaky legs. For the rest of the night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, swearing to myself it had been some tug's engine reverberating off the banks. But I knew better. Engines fade. This had stopped like a hand snapping shut. The next morning, I almost convinced myself it hadn't happened. Work came easy when you bury your head in it, patching holes, sanding layers, breathing in the chemical stink of resin until your brain goes numb. But every time I walked to the river's edge, I caught myself holding my breath, waiting. That evening, as the sun bled orange through the cypress, I heard it again, louder this time. I felt it through my chest before my ears caught it, like a tuning fork pressed against bone. The same hum, rising, falling, lingering on notes too long to be mechanical. I tried to steady myself, but when I looked down, my hands were trembling, as if the sound itself had agitated my muscles. Again, I found my boots at the dock's edge before I realized I was moving. The current was slow, but in the fading light it looked black, endless. The hum was coming from it, inside it, like something down deep was calling air through a throat too large to imagine. The hair on my arms stood straight. My scalp tightened. It wasn't fear, not at first. It was compulsion, a pull, the same way you feel leaning over a ledge, that whisper of gravity daring you to step. I stayed longer this time, long enough that when the sound stopped, I almost leaned forward as if to chase it. That night, I dreamed of water rushing past my ears, not drowning me, not killing me, just carrying me along. My body in the current, the hum filling my skull until I could no longer tell if it came from outside or from within. Days blurred after that. I worked. I sweated. I patched hulls. But my nights belonged to the river. The hum never came at the same hour. Sometimes right after dusk, sometimes past 3 in the morning. Each time it found me, I was already half standing, half dreaming, waiting. Each time I drew closer to the edge, I started leaving the RV door unlocked, as if I wanted nothing between me and that sound. My tools went neglected. Customers came by looking for progress on their boats, and I mumbled excuses about shortages, delays. Truth was, I couldn't bring myself to focus when the river was alive at night, humming like some vast animal pacing in the dark. On the 4th night, I brought a flashlight. I wanted to see. I waited until the hum rose again, then swept the beam across the water. The current shimmered silver, catching on ripples. Nothing beneath, no boats, no floating logs, just water. But the light seemed to sink faster than it should, swallowed by depth I knew wasn't there. This bend wasn't bottomless. It should have shown sand, debris, a carp flashing scales, but the beam vanished into blackness as if the river had no floor. The hum grew louder. I crouched, set the flashlight on the dock, leaned forward on my hands. My pulse hammered with the rhythm. The water didn't look like water anymore. It looked like glass, trembling with the sound beneath it. I wanted to touch it, but a shadow moved first. At least I thought it was a shadow. A darker shape sliding under the surface, huge and slow like a whale drifting just beneath. But that was impossible. This river couldn't hold something that size, not here. The shape shifted, elongated, its edge dissolving until I couldn't tell if it was a body or just distortion from the vibration itself. My breath caught. The hum deepened, and my chest constricted so hard it felt like my ribs would crack. My hand lowered, inches from the water. Then, a splash upstream. A real, ordinary splash. I jerked back as a gar broke surface, twisting, silver in the beam before sinking again. The shadow was gone. The hum cut off. I stumbled backward, tripped on a coil of rope, and landed hard. The flashlight rolled, its beam skittering over the dock, catching on rusted chains, spider webs, my own boots shaking. And then, silence. The river went back to its muttering, its natural voice. I sat there until dawn. By morning, I had decided I was losing my mind. Heatstroke, fumes, exhaustion. Maybe the hum was tinnitus. Maybe the shape was a trick of light. Men break down in stranger ways, especially alone out here. But then I found the footprints. They weren't mine. The dock was caked in dried mud and river silt, always messy with boot marks from the few fishermen who still use the bend. But these prints were bare. Human, yes, but too wide, the toes long, splayed almost like hands. They began at the water's edge, emerging, not entering. And they stopped halfway down the dock, as if whoever made them had simply dissolved into the night air. I stood over them with my stomach hollow. The boards were damp where the mud had smeared, still fresh. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? Some of the old timers down here already talk about the river like it's alive, hungry. They'd only laugh, or worse, nod like they knew. But I couldn't stay away. That night, I found myself back at the edge again, waiting for the river to sing. I waited until nearly midnight before it came again. The air was still, thick with mosquitoes, the kind of August night where you can taste the salt and metal in the humidity. My skin was slick, and my head felt heavy, almost feverish. When the first vibration reached me, like someone bowing the lowest string of a cello, I felt my throat tighten in response. It was stronger now. No mistaking it. The dock rattled under my boots. The barrels stacked along the yard gave off a faint metallic ring. Even the air itself seemed to waver, as though the sound wasn't just carried by the river, but by everything it touched. I held myself firm, though my knees wanted to buckle. The hum rose again, carrying that strange cadence, not music, but something that wanted to be. The notes stretched mournful, bending at the ends in a way no instrument could copy. I thought about the wordless songs my grandmother used to hum when she worked in the kitchen, half lullaby, half prayer. The memory almost made me weep. Then I saw movement. At first it was only ripples, breaking the surface against the current. Then shapes, not one but several, surfacing with a slowness that froze the breath in my lungs. They looked like heads, round, pale domes rising in unison, each about the size of a man's skull. Water streamed down their sides as they broke surface, but no faces appeared. No eyes, no mouths, only blank skin that gleamed in the moonlight. My first thought was turtles, giant soft shells maybe, but the way they rose was too synchronized, too deliberate. They hovered just beneath the surface, motionless as if waiting. The hum continued, vibrating deeper, and the heads dipped once in response, like nodding. I stumbled back, almost toppling into a stack of scrap planks. My flashlight slipped from my hand, rolling and casting jagged arcs of light across the dock. By the time I snatched it back up and swung it toward the water, the shapes were gone. Only black current stared back. But the footprints were there again. New ones. This time I saw them form. The beam caught the wet gleam as toes pressed into the wood, right at the water's edge, one by one. Nothing emerged. No body, no legs, no ripple. Just impressions. Invisible weights stepping onto the dock, each print appearing fresh and dark as if a person had risen from the river. My stomach dropped into my boots. I staggered backward, the flashlight beam jerking with me, too afraid to look away, but too terrified to keep watching. The prints came closer, slow but deliberate, pressing toward the middle of the dock where I'd been standing minutes before. The hum cut off, and in that sudden silence I realized something. The footprints weren't wet with water. They were steaming. Thin tendrils rose off them, faint but visible in the cool air. I dropped the light. My body moved before my mind could catch up, bolting toward the RV. The gravel crunched under my boots as I ran, the night air tearing at my lungs. I didn't stop until I was inside, slamming the thin door shut, locking it, my chest heaving. Inside smelled like sweat and resin and fear. I sat in the dark, listening. My ears rang with silence, but under it I thought I heard faint tapping on the gravel. Not footsteps exactly, more like something brushing, dragging. I curled against the wall until exhaustion pulled me under. When I woke the next morning, my door was open. The lock wasn't broken. It was turned from the inside. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound that came out of me was thin, desperate. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my coffee. Every part of me wanted to pack up and leave that place, abandon the yard, the boats, the work, but some heavier part anchored me. That sound, the song, lingered in my bones like a half-remembered dream. And the strangest thing was, I wanted to hear it again. Not just out of fear, but out of something that felt almost like longing, like it was meant for me. That day, I forced myself into routine, patching fiberglass, sanding resin, sealing seams. My arms ached, my throat tasted of chemicals, but all the while my ears strained for a vibration that wasn't there. By dusk, I was trembling. I felt like an addict waiting for his next fix. Night fell. The crickets screamed from the reeds. A tug groaned past in the channel, its light vanishing upriver. Hours stretched. And then it came. The hum rose so suddenly it made me gasp. This time it wasn't distant. It was in the walls of the RV, rattling the thin aluminum like a drum. The spoon on the counter quivered. My teeth buzzed. I bolted upright and stumbled outside. The river glowed faintly under the moon, black and silver. The hum pulsed, deeper, resonant, filling me so completely I couldn't tell where it ended and my heartbeat began. And I swear, this time it was calling words. Not words I knew, but syllables, almost human, stretched and bent by water. They rose in a pattern, repeating, insistent. I walked toward it. The dock groaned under my weight. I barely noticed the footprints. New ones, steaming again, lined neatly toward the edge. My eyes fixed only on the water, because something was standing there. It wasn't clear, not fully. More suggestion than body, like a man-shaped shadow cut from the surface of the river itself. It rose where the footprints ended, taller than me, shoulders blurred as though wrapped in mist. No face, no hands, only outline. But when the hum deepened, its head tilted, toward me. The pull in my chest became unbearable. My knees bent without command. I stepped forward, one boot, then the other, until the river's edge was under my toes. The shadow lifted an arm, not a hand. Something longer, jointed wrong, tapering into points like reeds. It extended toward me, and I should have run, should have screamed. But all I felt was surrender. Then, from upriver, a horn blasted. A tugboat, small, old, its deck light cutting weakly through the dark. The sound shattered the hum like glass. The figure dissolved. The dock lay empty, but for the steaming prints at my feet. The tug passed, its captain never seeing me frozen there, my heart breaking against my ribs. The river returned to silence, and I was left standing on the dock, alone, with the unmistakable ache of something unfinished. The next morning, the world felt wrong in its brightness. Sunlight pressed down heavy on the yard, glaring off the resin-smeared hull I'd abandoned half-finished. Pelicans wheeled overhead, clumsy shadows crossing the gravel. For a moment, I could almost pretend nothing had happened, that I hadn't stood on the dock watching something rise out of the water, watching it reach for me. But when I bent to pick up a dropped wrench, I saw the prints again. They were there, even in daylight. Faint, drying now, but unmistakable. The long, splayed toes pressed into the boards, leading from the water to the place I had stood before the tug's horn cut through. The edges were curling and cracked from the heat, but still darker than the wood around them, as if whatever left them had burned into the dock itself. I set the wrench down slowly, my hands trembling. It wasn't a dream. That realization should have broken me, sent me running north, back toward roads and lights and crowds. But instead, I felt something else. Shame. Because deep in my chest, where the hum had once lived, there was only silence now. And I missed it. I went through the motions of work, welded a plate to a barge's hull, sanded a strip of rotting fiberglass, spilled resin down my arm and didn't notice until it burned. Every scrape of metal, every hammer strike, felt like mockery. The boats were just dead things compared to the river's voice. By mid-afternoon, I was standing at the edge again, staring at water that looked flat, ordinary, stupid in its ordinariness. The channel rolled sluggish, brown and green with algae blooms. A gar flicked its tail. Dragonflies zipped in pairs. I wanted it to sing. I wanted it so badly that when I realized I was whispering, low, tuneless, imitating the rise and fall of that hum, I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. The rest of the day, I locked myself in the RV, drinking warm beer until my eyelids sagged. I told myself I wouldn't go back out that night, that I'd block the door if I had to. But when the vibration came, there was no choice. It began subtle, like someone thumping the earth with a slow heartbeat. The window glass trembled. The aluminum walls gave off a faint buzz. My teeth clicked together without me meaning to. And then the cadence built, louder, carrying that same suggestion of song. I found myself at the door, hand on the latch. My legs moved like they belonged to someone else. The air outside was wet and sweet, cicadas droning in waves, the sky bruised with clouds that hadn't been there an hour ago. The dock waited. I stepped onto it with no hesitation this time. The footprints were already there, fresh and steaming, leading to the edge. My boots almost fit inside them as I walked. My body shivered, though the heat clung like a wet rag. The river was glowing faintly, though there was no moon. A pale light pulsed under the surface, dim but steady, spreading outward in ripples that didn't belong to wind or current. The hum matched it, each swell of sound making the glow brighten, fade, brighten again. And then something surfaced. Not a shadow this time, not vague. It broke the water with deliberate calm, rising taller than a man, shoulders streaming black liquid. Its outline rippled, shifting, as though made of water and skin at once. No eyes, no face, but impressions of features formed and dissolved on its head, like a mask being sculpted from clay only to melt again. The hum deepened. I felt it inside my bones. I knew, without knowing how, that it wanted me to come. It raised its arm again, the too long, jointed limb bending toward me. Its fingers dripped water that hissed into steam when it touched the wood, and I stepped forward. I don't remember deciding. My body just obeyed. The dock creaked under my weight. My boots met the last plank before the edge. The figure leaned closer, its head cocking in an imitation of curiosity, like it was learning me. The hum pulsed so strong I thought my heart would explode. When I lifted my hand, reaching to meet its outstretched limb, the sound shifted. It wasn't random. It wasn't noise. It was language. Not English, not French, not any tongue I knew, but language all the same. Phrases repeated, syllables shaped by rhythm and resonance. I couldn't translate, but I understood the intent the way you understand a dog's growl or a lullaby's hush. It was calling me, promising, warning, all at once. And my name was in it. Bent, stretched, drawn out through vibrations, but mine all the same. I whispered, yes. The figure's head dipped. The river glowed brighter, pulsing in time with the sound. Its arm reached closer until the steam of its dripping touch brushed my skin. My hand trembled forward. And then the dock gave way. Not from rot, not from weight. It snapped like something had pulled it. Boards split, nails screamed free, and suddenly I was plunging into the black water. The shock stole my breath. The current seized me, pulling me down so fast I couldn't tell which way was up. My limbs flailed, useless, my lungs burning. And through it all, the hum thundered in my skull. Not muffled by water, louder, clearer, vibrating through every bone. Shapes surrounded me. Those pale domes I'd seen before, dozens of them, circling, dipping, rising around my sinking body. Their surfaces brushed my arms, my legs, slick and cold. The sound they made together was deafening, a chorus of that wordless song, building, building, as if celebrating. I opened my mouth to scream. River water poured in, and then I woke on the dock, soaked, coughing, ribs aching. The boards beneath me were whole again. No break, no splintered edge, though my palms were full of cuts as if I'd grabbed something sharp. The footprints were gone. The river muttered its ordinary language, tugboats distant, cicadas screaming in the reeds, but the sound was still in my chest, not fading, not gone, a resonance that hadn't left. And I knew with a certainty that hollowed me. I hadn't been dreaming. The river had let me go. For now. The first thing I noticed the next morning was that my watch had stopped. It had been running fine the night before. A cheap digital thing, waterproof, the kind a boatman trusts because he can knock it against steel and it won't break. Now the display was blank. No blinking, no faded numbers, just dead. I shook it, tapped the glass, pressed every button, nothing. That unsettled me more than waking up soaked, more than the cuts in my palms. It meant something had passed through me, or I had passed through something. And whatever it was, it didn't just touch me. It touched the world around me. I left the broken watch on the counter of the RV. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus. My hands went through the motions of work, sanding, sealing seams, tightening bolts, but none of it stayed in my memory. The noise of tools felt far away. I caught myself staring at the waterline again and again, waiting for the vibration to stir in my ribs. By afternoon, I found myself wandering the yard in the heat, dizzy, like I'd skipped meals. I had eaten bread, canned beans, black coffee, but my stomach gnawed at itself anyway. My reflection in the RV's metal siding stopped me cold. I looked thinner. not just from bad posture or a trick of light. My cheeks were hollow, my eyes had darkened, the skin beneath sagging like I'd been awake for weeks. My shirt, damp with sweat, hung looser. I hadn't lost that much weight overnight. It wasn't possible, and yet the sight of my wasted reflection didn't scare me the way it should have. I felt something else instead, a strange pride, like I was being remade. That night, when the hum began again, I didn't resist. The dock was waiting. The prints were already there. This time, dozens of them, overlapping, scattered, leading both toward the water and back again. The wood steamed with the memory of footsteps, as if the figures had been pacing while they waited. The glow beneath the surface was brighter, spread wider. The hum was clearer, louder, carrying that not-quite language straight into my chest cavity. And there they were again, the pale domes breaking surface in perfect rhythm. Not dozens this time, hundreds, covering the bend, stretching into the distance, each one rising and dipping, singing through the water. The figure was there too, waiting at the edge. It looked stronger than before, its outline firmer, less like mist and more like flesh. The suggestion of a face lingered longer, jaw, cheek, hollows where eyes might belong. Its arm raised, the dripping, steaming limb pointing at me as if calling a name. And I stepped forward willingly. The hum didn't frighten me anymore. It filled me, steadied me, like it was shaping me into something I hadn't known I was missing. When I reached out this time, our hands nearly touched. The steam burned my skin, but I didn't pull back. The dock rattled with the chorus of domes singing below. The water shimmered like glass, reflecting not the sky, but strange lights moving in its depths. Red, green, gold, like lanterns twisting in impossible patterns. And for the first time, the sound didn't just press into me. I pressed back, my chest vibrated, my throat opened. I wasn't humming yet, not really, but the air inside me carried the rhythm, matched it. The figure's head tilted, studying. Then it leaned closer, the knot face bending near, and the chorus surged louder, triumphant. I felt something slide into my head. Not a thought, not words, an image. Boats, rusted hulls, snapped masts, barges broken like toys, all half buried in silt at the bottom of the river. Nets torn to ribbons, ropes unraveling, and bones, so many bones, stacked and scattered, bleached pale against the mud. My knees buckled. The figure caught me, not with hands, but with water itself, a column rising to hold me upright. I felt it against my ribs, slick and burning cold. The image shifted. Men and women, faces slack, walking into the river with blank eyes, their clothes darkening, their hair streaming behind them, each of them humming the same sound that filled me now. And then silence. Darkness, the bottom of the river again, the pale domes circling. I tore myself back with a gasp, clutching my chest, coughing hard enough to spit blood. The figure stood motionless, head still cocked. The chorus faded, the glow dimmed, and just like that, it was gone. The river muttered its ordinary rhythm again. But I was left on my knees on the dock, ribs aching, throat raw, a new resonance trembling in my bones. I knew, with a kind of calm horror, it was teaching me. It wanted me to learn its song. The next days blurred. I lost track of time without the watch. My phone had no service this far out, but even the clock seemed unreliable, jumping, freezing, then restarting on its own. I stopped trusting it. Sleep came in broken fragments. When I closed my eyes, I felt water rushing past my ears, smelled algae and mud in my nose, tasted rust on my tongue. My body wasted more, ribs showing through my shirt, veins rising in my arms. But I didn't feel weak. I felt sharpened. And when the river called, I answered. At first, just with breath, shaping the hum in my chest to match, then with sound low and ragged until the notes came smoother. I stood on the dock at night, singing back to the thing in the water, my voice joining the chorus of domes. The figure grew clearer each time, its outline settling, its face almost steady. The hollows where eyes belonged glowed faintly, and I knew without knowing that it was watching me, approving. One night, after I'd sung until my throat bled, I found something left on the dock. A piece of cloth. Faded, shredded, but unmistakable. A shirt sleeve. Plaid. The kind the shrimpers wore. The wood beneath it was burned black, as if the fabric had been pressed down hard while it was still wet, steaming. I turned it over with shaking hands. On the inner seam was a patch of embroidery, half gone, but enough letters remained to spell Lou. I knew a Lou. A man who'd gone missing 2 years before, his trawler found drifting empty downriver. Folks said he drowned, same as others before him. The river takes what it wants, that was the phrase. Nobody ever found his body. Now I was holding part of his shirt, left for me like a gift. My stomach turned, but my chest ached with something else. Recognition. The river had taken Lou. The river had taken many, and now it was asking if I was ready to join them. I stopped checking the calendar. Days and nights blurred together, each one measured not by sunlight, but by the hum. The river had become my clock. I hardly ate anymore. Cans of beans, stale bread, half a bottle of whiskey. I forced them down only when my stomach twisted too hard to ignore. But I wasn't wasting away the way I thought I would. My body was thinner, yes, but not weaker. My arms still swung the hammer, my hands still welded plates, though the work had no meaning anymore. Every sound, every motion was just waiting for the call to begin. And when it came, I would sing. I didn't resist. I couldn't. The first note tore from me like a cough, ragged and broken, but night after night it grew smoother, deeper. I matched the cadence until my ribs ached, until my throat felt raw, until I no longer heard my own voice at all, only the river's voice using me as an instrument. That's when the dreams began to spill over into the day. I'd be sanding a hull and look up to see water pouring from the tree line, flowing upward into the sky like the world had tilted. I'd glance down at my palms and see them dripping, steaming, as if my own hands were turning into footprints. I'd hear men's voices, women's voices, rising in the hum behind me, though when I turned, there was no one. But the worst part, the part that still freezes me when I think about it, was when I began to see them on land. I'd catch sight of them in the corner of my eye while walking back from the dock. Pale domes bobbing just above the grass, slipping between barrels, hovering near the RV. Once I saw one resting against the rusted hull of a shrimp boat, almost like a head laid down to sleep. But when I turned to face it, there was nothing. I wasn't alone anymore, even when the yard was empty. One night, the hum began earlier than usual, before the sun had even gone down. The sky was still bruised orange when I heard the vibration in my chest. My breath hitched. I dropped the wrench I was holding. The sound wasn't waiting for me anymore. It was demanding. By the time I reached the dock, the glow had already risen under the water. The chorus of domes broke the surface in waves, stretching out into the channel, hundreds upon hundreds. Their song shook the boards beneath me, rattled the chains, clanged the barrels together like bells. The figure stood waiting. It was clearer than ever. Tall, lean, the outline of shoulders, arms, a head that now held the suggestion of eyes, glowing faint and steady. The steaming prints around it littered the dock, overlapping in chaotic trails. It lifted its arm again, pointing at me. The hum deepened into a single phrase, repeated, drawn out. I felt the syllables crush my ribs. I'd burn my throat. And this time I understood. It was asking. Not in words, not in anything I could translate, but I knew what it wanted. It wanted me to step forward, to stop resisting, to join. I sang back. My voice cracked, but the sound carried. The figure tilted its head, the chorus surged louder as if applauding. Then I took a step. The dock moaned. The glow beneath the surface brightened, casting shadows across the yard. My skin prickled with heat. Another step. The footprints steamed beside mine, leading forward. The figure lowered its arm and extended both limbs now, reaching. I opened my mouth to sing again, and a hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun so fast I nearly fell. Behind me stood a man, drenched, clothes hanging in tatters, his eyes hollow and blank. Water streamed from his hair, dripping onto the dock. His mouth hung open, but no breath came. It was Lou. I knew his face, even ruined as it was. The man who'd vanished, the one whose shirt sleeve I had found. He gripped my arm with fingers cold as iron. His lips moved, not in the hum, not in the song, but in something else. A whisper. Don't. The figure's head snapped toward him. The glow flickered. The chorus faltered. For a moment, the whole river seemed to hold its breath. Lou's grip tightened, nails biting my skin. His eyes rolled, and then he was gone. No splash, no sound, just gone, as though the dock itself had swallowed him. The glow surged again, brighter, furious. The hum rose so strong the boards rattled beneath me, nails screaming. The figure lifted its head and bellowed a note that drove me to my knees. I crawled backward, shaking, hands slipping on the steaming prints. The dock quaked but didn't break. And then silence. The glow vanished. The chorus sank. The river returned to its ordinary mutter. But I wasn't the same. I sat there until dawn, staring at the water, my chest hollow, my skin burning where Lou's hand had held me. He had warned me, but part of me hated him for it, because the song still lingered in my chest, unfinished. And now it wanted me more than ever. I didn't leave the yard for days after that. Couldn't. Every time I thought about stepping off the property, driving upriver, finding a payphone, even just walking to the next town, I felt the tug. Not like temptation, like gravity. Like the river would rise and wrap itself around my ankles the second I turned my back on it. So I stayed. Worked when I could, sat when I couldn't, drank when the silence got too loud. But the hum was never gone. Even in daylight, even with the wind loud in the reeds, I could feel it under my skin, quiet, pulsing, as though the river had pressed something into my bones. Sometimes I'd wake from a dead sleep and realize I'd been humming along in my dreams, lips moving, breath whistling. I stopped looking at my reflection in the RV mirror. My face looked thinner, stretched, eyes sunk in, skin gray around the edges. Worse than that, I'd catch little shifts, things that weren't mine. A ripple across the cheek, a blur at the jawline, as if the water in me wanted to surface. I told myself it was exhaustion, malnutrition, a man going crazy from being alone too long. But then the prints came back. Not just on the dock, everywhere, across the boatyard gravel, inside the empty hulls, on the RV steps, steaming faint and sharp like iron pressed into the metal. Some mornings I'd step outside and find the grass flattened, pressed in spirals leading straight toward the river. I wasn't imagining it. Something was moving when I slept, and worse, it had started leaving things behind. The first was a watch, rusted nearly through, leather band eaten by rot. It lay on the dock, half submerged in the cracks. The second was a boot, size 12, torn at the heel, left in the weeds just outside the fence. The third was a plastic ID badge, the kind oil workers wore on the rigs upriver. I didn't recognize the name, but the face was there. A man, maybe mid-30s, smiling in a picture taken years ago. When I touched it, the plastic was warm. I started to remember Lou's hand on me, cold and heavy. His warning, don't. But that wasn't the last thing. No, there had been more. A shape in his lips, another word he hadn't gotten out before he vanished. I couldn't place it, couldn't let it go. Every night after, I sat by the dock trying to catch it, mouthing the word myself, replaying his face in my mind. That's when the dreams changed. No more songs, no more blurred shadows. Now it was clear enough to smell the salt and rust. I'd see a boat caught in the channel, lights dead, men screaming as the glow rose beneath them. Their voices weren't singing anymore. They were begging. But their throats swelled, filled with the sound until they couldn't speak at all. One night I woke with water in my lungs. I coughed for minutes straight, hacking brackish spit across the floor of the RV. My pillow was soaked. It wasn't just dreams. The river was inside me. I tried to fight it, boarded the windows of the RV, hammered the door shut, stuffed my ears with rags. I stayed inside for 2 days, eating cold beans from the can, drinking until I blacked out. But the third night, it came anyway. The humming rose not through my ears but my ribs. My bones vibrated like tuning forks, shaking the boards loose under my bed. The air inside the RV thickened, tasting of iron and rain. And then, silence. I knew better than to move. I held still, breath shallow, waiting. Something shifted just outside. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, not heavy, not light, like the weight of a body dragging water with it. They circled the RV once, twice, then stopped at the door. The metal creaked, a hand pressed against it from the outside, slow and patient. Steam hissed against the thin sheet of steel. I held my breath so long my lungs burned, the pressure lingered, then faded. But when I finally dared to look toward the window, I saw it. Not a face, not exactly. A blur of light pressed against the glass, fogging it from outside, glowing faintly as though the river itself were peering in. And then it was gone. I didn't sleep after that. Couldn't. By dawn, I packed everything I could carry, cans, whiskey, a flashlight, the shotgun from under the bench, and staggered out toward the levee. If the thing wanted me, it would have to drag me. I was done waiting. But when I reached the top of the bank and looked down, my knees buckled. The river wasn't moving. The surface lay flat, still as glass, reflecting the pale dawn sky. No current, no wind, not even the bugs touched it. And in the middle of that silence, a single dome broke the surface. Not glowing, not humming, just there. Watching. I don't know what kept me rooted there so long. I should have run, should have turned my back on that still, impossible sheet of water. But my legs locked and my eyes stayed fixed on the dome. It was shaped like the top of a head. Round, smooth, too perfect to be driftwood, too still to be a turtle. It hovered, just breaking the surface, and though it didn't move, I swear I felt it breathing. The reeds on either side of me shifted in time, inhaling, exhaling. I raised the shotgun without thinking. Not to fire, not yet, just to remind myself I still had hands, still had a choice. The metal felt light, almost flimsy, like a child's toy against whatever waited out there. And then it sank. Not with a splash, not even with a ripple, just slipped backward into the dark, leaving the river as flat as a pane of glass. That should have been the end of it. A trick of light, a sleep-deprived hallucination. But when I lowered the shotgun, I saw the prints again. Not just one set, dozens. Scattered across the mud at the bank, pressed deep like hooves, like palms, like knees. They led straight from the water to the grass at my feet. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. My heel caught on something, and when I looked down, I nearly retched. A jacket, waterlogged, torn at the sleeves, still zipped halfway up. Inside it, bones gleamed white, clean as if they'd been scoured. The collar still bore a patch. Wilson. Not a stranger. I remembered Wilson, young guy, worked on one of the towboats upriver, always drinking beer at the diner on Friday nights. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. The river had brought him back to me. After that, I stopped pretending. I didn't try to leave again. I didn't try to call for help. Some nights I told myself it was fear holding me there, but deep down I knew better. It was expectation. The river wasn't done with me. Each evening, just after sunset, the humming would rise. Not a song anymore, not even words, just a vibration, deep and steady, pulling my body into rhythm with it. My ribs thrummed, my teeth ached, the fillings in my molars hummed like struck wires. And in that vibration, I began to hear shapes, not voices, not language, but meaning. They wanted me. Not to eat, not to kill. To join, to dissolve. I'd catch glimpses at the edges of the boatyard, figures moving among the broken hulls. Faces blurred, arms bent in ways that didn't make sense. They never came close enough for me to see details, but I could feel their attention, like a heat on my skin. One night I caught myself standing knee-deep in the shallows, shotgun hanging limp at my side, eyes fixed on the black water. My clothes were soaked, but I had no memory of wading in. My mouth was moving, whispering something. Over and over. It took me a long time to recognize the word. Home. The dreams returned, worse than before. No longer just visions of others drowning. Now I was in them. My lungs filled, but I didn't struggle. My skin peeled back, but I didn't bleed. Something inside me loosened, spilling into the dark until I couldn't tell where my body ended and the river began. And always, always that light rose beneath me. A dome. A glow, a perfect circle waiting to swallow me whole. Each time I woke, I was closer to the water. Sometimes inside the RV, soaked to the knees. Sometimes outside on the dock, shotgun rusting in my lap. Once I woke floating on my back, 30 yards out in the channel, stars spinning above me. The current should have dragged me miles downstream. But the river wasn't moving. It was holding me, cradling me. By then I knew. It wasn't going to let me go. The question wasn't if I'd step in, but when. I tried to fight, drank until my liver throbbed, boarded myself inside the RV again, this time with nails, chains, bolts, but every night the humming slipped through the walls, through my bones, whispering the promise. And then came the final gift. Laid on the dock at dawn, dripping, fresh. A photograph. Me. Sitting on the levee, shotgun across my knees. But the river behind me wasn't flat. It was open, glowing, filled with shapes I couldn't recognize, arms, faces, eyes, all blurred into light. And they were smiling. That night, I didn't bother with the chains. I sat on the dock, shotgun beside me, and waited. The humming rose, louder than it ever had before, not just inside me, but across the whole yard, metal ringing, boards shaking, water quivering like struck glass. The dome broke the surface, glowing, and this time I didn't look away. It wasn't a head. It wasn't a dome. It was an opening. And inside it, faces moved. Wilson, Lou, others I recognized from town. All blurred, all smiling, their mouths moving in rhythm with the hum. The water lapped at my boots, warm as blood. My body leaned forward without my permission, and for the first time I didn't resist. I wish I could tell you I found the strength to resist. That something deep inside, faith, instinct, survival, snapped me out of it. But the truth is, when the water touched my shins, I felt relief. The way a man feels crawling out of the desert and pressing his lips to the first muddy puddle. The hum swelled until it wasn't just sound, it was pressure, vibration, memory. Every scar on my body ached with it. Every regret surfaced in flashes, the fights I'd lost, the faces of people I'd failed. My father's disappointed stare, the way he told me fixing boats would break me in the end. All of it wrapped in the same vibration, like the river was peeling back my bones and pulling out the marrow. I went in up to my waist. The current didn't fight me. It lifted me. Like hands, like a crowd passing me overhead. The dome of light widened, stretching until it filled my vision, until the night sky was nothing but a smear of stars around its edges. Faces turned in the glow, clear now, detailed. Wilson, Lou, a boy I recognized from the bait shop, my uncle who drowned when I was 12. They didn't look dead. They didn't look alive. They looked content. Eyes soft, mouths curved into the faintest smiles as if they'd been waiting for me. And then I heard it, not a hum anymore, not vibration, words, not from outside, from inside me. You're home. I don't know how long I stayed there. Seconds, maybe. Hours. At some point, I felt my lips moving with theirs, speaking words I didn't know but understood anyway. A language older than the river, older than the ground beneath it. I felt my body unfastening, the way a rope frays in water, flesh loosening, bones softening, thoughts unraveling into the current. And God help me. I welcomed it. I wanted it. But something broke the spell. A sound not from the river, not from the hum, but from the dock, wood splitting. The RV door slamming shut. I turned. Through the blur of glow and water, I saw the shape of my boat, the old trawler I'd worked on for 20 years. Half-rotted, but still mine. Its bow light flickered, weak, failing, but pointed straight at me. For the first time in weeks, I remembered who I was. Not a face in the water, not a voice in the hum. A man. A man with hands, lungs, a heartbeat. A man who fixed boats, and I staggered back. The river resisted. Arms, real or imagined, pulled at my legs, gripped my wrists, tried to cradle me deeper. But I fought, stumbling, thrashing, gasping until my boots found mud. I crawled onto the dock, coughing, retching river water. The humming wailed behind me, furious, shaking the planks. The light surged, then dimmed, then sank, pulling the surface flat as glass once more. And then, silence. I don't remember sleeping, but dawn found me curled on the boards, shotgun still by my side, clothes heavy with silt and blood. My hands were raw, my nails cracked. The river looked normal again, slow, brown, empty. But the prints remained, not mine. Dozens, hundreds, pressed into the mud, leading from the water's edge into the grass, scattered all around the yard like a crowd had gathered while I drowned. I followed them with my eyes until they vanished into the tree line. That was 3 years ago. I left the Delta, sold the RV, haven't touched a boat since. I live inland now, far from rivers, lakes, ponds, anything that moves in currents. But some nights when the wind comes low through the pines, I hear it, that hum. Soft at first, then louder, enough to rattle the glass in the windows. And in those moments, I remember the light, the faces, the promise. I remember how it felt being held by something vast, ancient, endless. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake long after the sound fades, isn't the fear of being taken again. It's the longing. Because some nights, more than anything, I want to go back. The air in rural Ohio carried a damp sweetness that clung to the skin, a weight of soil and rain mixing with something more fragile, an almost metallic sharpness, as though the night itself had teeth. I had pulled my RV up beside a field of pumpkins, untouched and strangely uniform, their orange bodies glowing faintly under the silver moonlight. At first glance, it looked almost staged, like a painting no one dared to disturb. Rows upon rows of gourds stretched out into the distance, unpicked, unclaimed, as though time itself had passed them by. I had seen pumpkin patches before, messy with broken vines and footprints and wagons dragging harvest home, but this one was whole, unbroken, pristine. That detail should have bothered me more than it did in the moment. But I was tired, road-worn, convincing myself I had found the perfect quiet place to sleep. My name's Daniel. I was 39 years old when this happened, driving back roads through Ohio after weeks of restless wandering, chasing something I couldn't put words to. Maybe it was peace. Maybe it was a way to feel like my life still belonged to me. I had parked in plenty of strange places before, but the pumpkin field struck me as harmless. Beautiful, even. I killed the engine, stepped outside to stretch, and the silence folded around me like a blanket. Not silence the way people mean it in towns, when they turn off their televisions and hear the hum of refrigerators. I mean a deep, pressing silence where your heartbeat feels louder than the night itself. The first thing I noticed was the air. Sweet, yes, but beneath it was a faint rot, like something wet left too long in a closed room. It clung to the nostrils, nagging. I thought maybe some pumpkins had gone soft and sour, but when I passed my flashlight over the first row, every pumpkin skin looked smooth, unscarred, bright, and whole. That was the first detail that made me uneasy. Nature doesn't deal in perfection. Something always spoils. I brushed it aside, walked back to the RV, and settled in with the faint glow of the field outside my window. That glow kept me awake longer than I'd admit, each pumpkin round and waiting, catching the moon in their ridges. My breath slowed, my eyelids grew heavy, and still I felt like I was being watched. Sometime past midnight, a sound pulled me awake. At first, I thought it was the creak of the RV, the groan of cooling metal, but no, it was softer, deliberate, a scrape, then another, like a knife against a board, dragging slow. I froze, every muscle taut, straining to listen. It came from outside, close, right where the pumpkin vines tangled in the dirt. My breath caught, and for one long moment, I did nothing. Fear has a way of convincing you that if you stay still enough, the world won't notice you exist. The sound stopped. The silence deepened. I let myself believe it had been my imagination, or maybe an animal nosing around. Foxes, raccoons, they make odd noises in the night. I lay back down. Eventually, sleep claimed me again. When I woke, dawn painted the horizon in pale orange, the mist clinging low over the field. I stepped outside to stretch, bleary-eyed, and froze in place. The pumpkins around my RV, dozens of them, were carved. Each one bore a jagged grin or a hollow-eyed stare, candleless yet glowing with dew. The faces hadn't been there last night. I was sure of it. My flashlight had swept over them, row after row, and every pumpkin was whole. Now they surrounded me like an audience, every gaze turned toward my RV. The first rational thought that came to me was prank. Kids from a nearby town, maybe, sneaking out in the night, laughing in the mist as they carved. But the cuts were too fresh, too wet, pulp still clinging to the grass. The sheer number of them didn't make sense. How many hands would it take to carve that many pumpkins in a single night? My heart thudded in my chest as I circled the RV, taking in each face. Some were crude, some eerily delicate, but all of them were looking at me. I didn't see a single footprint. That detail broke something in me. The field's soil was damp, soft. My own boots left dark impressions where I walked. But around the pumpkins, nothing. Not a shoe print, not a scuff of dirt, not even the mark of a blade dropped in haste. Just carved faces smiling in the fog. I told myself I needed to leave. Pack up, drive, get out of there before the story got stranger. But something rooted me in place, some stubborn disbelief. My hands trembled as I touched one of the jack-o'-lanterns. The cut was slick, the inside warm, as though it had been carved minutes ago. My stomach turned. The smell of pumpkin guts filled the air, too strong, too raw, and I backed away, swallowing hard. Inside the RV, I gripped the wheel, trying to calm my breath. Logic pressed against fear, demanding to be heard. Maybe I'd missed something last night. Maybe they had been there and exhaustion had blinded me. People see what they expect to see. Maybe I had wanted the field to be untouched so badly that I convinced myself it was. But deep inside, I knew better. As the engine rumbled to life, I glanced once more at the field. The mist curled low, hiding the rows beyond. And in that gray blur, I thought I saw movement. Not walking, not human. Something shifting between the vines. My throat tightened. I threw the RV into gear and pulled away, the tires spitting mud. The road wound through the countryside, lined with bare trees, and I didn't look back for miles. Still, the faces stayed with me. Their empty stares filled the corners of my mind. A silent chorus. I tried to tell myself it was behind me now, just another story to bury, another strange place to forget. But the truth was, some things don't let go, some fields don't want to be left behind, and I hadn't yet learned how far this one would follow me. I kept driving until the field was gone, but even as the road unfolded before me, something clung to my chest like a tightening rope. The steering wheel vibrated faintly beneath my palms, though the RV's engine hummed steady, almost soothing. I told myself I'd find a diner, a place with people and light and coffee strong enough to burn through the unease settling into my bones. Yet each time I passed an exit, I didn't take it. Each turnoff blurred by, every opportunity for comfort ignored, as if some quiet command insisted I keep going. The air in the cab felt thick, damp with the faint smell of pumpkin pulp. I swore I could smell it, even though the windows were closed tight. An hour later, I pulled off at a gravel turnout beside a stretch of farmland. I shut down the engine and just sat, trying to steady my breathing, convincing myself I was safe. When I finally dared to step outside, I scanned the horizon. The fields around me were bare, nothing but stubble and frost, the harvest already long gone. For the first time since leaving the pumpkin field, I let myself relax. My shoulders sagged. The silence here wasn't oppressive. It was ordinary, filled with the hum of distant traffic and the faint call of crows overhead. I told myself I was free of it, that whatever strange trick had played out back there had stayed behind. I stretched, feeling my muscles loosen, and then I turned back toward the RV. That's when I saw it. On the step just beneath the door, there sat a single pumpkin. Small, no bigger than a child's head, bright orange and wet with dew. My chest locked tight. It hadn't been there when I parked. My throat went dry as I crouched to look at it closer, my pulse thrumming in my ears. Its surface was smooth, unmarked, whole, not carved, yet, but I knew it was for me. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed to get inside and lock the door, but when I did, I couldn't bring myself to turn the ignition. I just sat there, staring through the windshield at the empty gravel lot, waiting for something. Anything. The day passed slow. I dozed in uneasy bursts, half expecting to wake each time to the sound of knives scraping rind. By dusk, when the sky turned bruised and purple, I forced myself to step outside again. The pumpkin was still there, only now its skin bore the faintest lines, delicate scratches forming the beginnings of a face. I staggered back, my mouth dry. The cuts were shallow, tentative, like someone had only just begun the carving, and yet I hadn't heard a sound. No footsteps on the gravel, no tapping of tools, nothing but my own shallow breaths. Fear is one thing, but doubt, it corrodes. It eats at your sense of self, your ability to trust your own eyes, your own mind. I told myself maybe I had overlooked the marks earlier. Maybe it had already been scratched when I first saw it. But the truth pressed harder. Something had worked on it while I sat inside. I couldn't stay there. I slammed the door, turned the key, and pulled back onto the road, the pumpkin shrinking in my side mirror until the dark took it completely. Night swallowed the highway whole. The headlights cut a narrow tunnel. Everything outside of it lost to shadow. My mind kept replaying the image of the pumpkin's shallow scratches, the half-formed grin it seemed to wear. I kept glancing into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a row of glowing faces chasing me down the asphalt. When I finally pulled into a small roadside RV park, the neon vacancy sign buzzing faintly, I felt relief wash through me. This was civilization, however small. A scattering of other RVs, porch lights burning on trailers, the faint hum of a generator. I parked, hooked up to power, and told myself I could breathe here, that whatever haunted that field couldn't follow me into a place where other people lived. But fear doesn't let go that easy. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, ears straining for the scrape I'd heard before. Hours passed. At some point, exhaustion must have taken me because I woke again to the pale wash of dawn. I yawned, stretched, and for the first time since the field, I thought maybe I'd made it through. Then I opened the door. Lined neatly along the edge of my RV's parking spot, stretching like a fence, were jack-o'-lanterns. Dozens of them. Their faces leered up at me, some grinning, some scowling, some with mouths wide as though screaming. Their pulp was fresh, their insides glistening in the morning light. Not a single sound had woken me while they were made. My knees weakened, my body going cold. I scanned the lot desperately, searching for anyone, any prankster, any sign of who had done this. But the other RVs were silent, their blinds drawn, and as I stared at those faces, something else struck me. Something that knotted my stomach in a way no prank ever could. Each jack-o'-lantern looked like me. Not perfectly, not like a sculpted portrait, but the angles of the cheeks, the long nose, the hollowed eyes, they were mine. Dozens of versions, distorted, exaggerated, mocking, an army of my own face, carved in orange flesh. The smell of raw pumpkin filled the air, thick and cloying. I stumbled back into the RV, slammed the door, and locked it. My reflection stared back at me from the narrow window, pale and wide-eyed. For the first time, I whispered the thought that had been building since the first morning. This wasn't a prank. This was something else entirely. I sat inside that RV, hands trembling against the steering wheel, staring out at the row of faces carved in my image. They seemed to glow in the gray morning light, slick with dew, pulp strands dripping from their jagged mouths like spit. I couldn't understand how it was possible. I hadn't told anyone where I was stopping. I hadn't seen another soul since pulling into this lot. And still, something, or someone, had carved my likeness into those pumpkins while I slept, silent as shadow, leaving no trace of their presence. I thought about knocking on a neighbor's door, demanding answers, but shame caught me by the throat. What would I even say? That pumpkins had appeared overnight and somehow mirrored my face? They'd think I was drunk, delirious, or worse. And maybe they'd be right. A small, poisonous seed of doubt sprouted in my mind. Was I slipping? Losing grip on reality? Long stretches of road and solitude can do that to a person, unraveling the mind thread by thread. But the smell in the air, the tang of fresh pumpkin guts, was undeniable. Real. Too real to dismiss as imagination. I couldn't eat. Couldn't even bring myself to brew coffee. Instead, I drove. Pulled out of that RV park like a hunted man, tires crunching over gravel as the row of jack-o'-lanterns faded in the mirror. The road stretched ahead, endless and bare, but no matter how many miles I put between myself and that park, my thoughts circled back. To the field. To the first sound I heard, the scrape of blade on rind. To the pumpkin left on my step, waiting. To the faces that had grown more personal with every carving. By late afternoon, my eyes burned from the strain of driving. I pulled into a rest stop, one of those forgotten little corners of highway, with vending machines buzzing faintly and a row of picnic tables under sagging trees. A faded map on a metal signpost showed nothing unusual, just farmland in every direction. I parked far from the other vehicles, craving distance, isolation, and yet the quiet pressed too heavy. Each gust of wind through the trees sounded like a whisper I couldn't quite catch. I tried to ground myself, took a walk around the lot, sat on a bench, watched a family with kids laughing over their snacks, their joy a strange counterweight to the dread boiling inside me. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I was safe, that the fear belonged to the night and would fade with the sun. But when I returned to my RV, there it was again. Another pumpkin, placed carefully at the edge of my driver's side door, as though set there while I'd walked only yards away. This one wasn't untouched. Its grin was wide, impossibly wide, cut so deep that pulp spilled onto the asphalt like entrails. My stomach lurched. I scanned the lot, heart pounding. The family was still there, the kids still laughing, the vending machine still buzzed. Nothing moved in the shadows, but someone had been close enough to leave that mark of presence without me noticing. I kicked the pumpkin aside, its flesh splitting wetly against the ground. Anger surged, hot and raw. Fear had its grip on me. Yes, but anger cut sharper. Whoever was behind this was playing a game. They wanted me rattled, wanted me doubting myself, shrinking into my own skin. I swore under my breath and climbed back into the RV, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. As I drove again, I noticed something else. The smell. It had changed. No longer the sweet tang of pumpkin alone. Now it carried something sharper, almost metallic, like blood on cold air. It clung to my clothes, the seats, the steering wheel. I rolled the windows down, desperate for fresh air, but the scent lingered, as though it lived inside me now. Night crept fast. The highway emptied, the horizon swallowing the last of the sun in bruised purple. Headlights stretched long over cracked asphalt. I told myself I'd drive until I reached a city, a motel, somewhere with neon lights and 24-hour noise. But exhaustion seeped deep into my bones, and eventually I pulled into another isolated turnout, too weary to continue. The sky was moonless, stars cold and sharp. I sat in the dark, engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal. Every nerve in me screamed to keep moving, to never stop, but my body refused. I told myself just a few hours of sleep, then I'd leave before dawn. Just a few hours. Sleep came quick and heavy, but I dreamed. I dreamed of the field, the pumpkins stretched out forever, endless rows under a pale sky. Each one bore a face, but not just mine anymore. Faces of people I'd known, strangers I'd passed, even the family from the rest stop. And as I walked between them, the carved mouths moved. Whispers spilled out, wet and gurgling, too soft to understand but too urgent to ignore. I tried to run, but the vines curled around my ankles, pulling me down, dragging me toward the soil that smelled not of earth, but of rot and ash. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat. My throat was raw, as if I'd been screaming. The clock glowed 3:12 a.m., and then a sound. Soft, deliberate. That same scrape of blade against rind, slow and patient, right outside my window. I froze, blood cold in my veins. The noise was so close it felt like it was inside the RV itself. My breath caught as I dared to look toward the glass, my reflection trembling there. And in that reflection, faint but certain, I saw movement just beyond the glass. A shadow, bent low, carving. I couldn't move. My breath rasped shallow in my chest, my heartbeat loud enough to drown out thought. That sound, the scrape, slow and wet, was inches away, on the other side of thin glass. I strained my eyes trying to catch more than a flicker, but all I saw was the suggestion of motion, a curve of shoulder, a bent head. Whatever it was working with meticulous patience, the way a craftsman might shape wood. My first instinct was to turn on the headlights, flood the dark with light, and expose what waited outside. My hand hovered over the switch, trembling, but fear whispered, what if light only made it clearer? Sometimes the unknown, the suggestion, is survivable, but seeing the truth, that could shatter me. The scraping stopped, silence ballooned so thick it felt alive. My throat ached from holding still, from swallowing down the rise of panic that begged me to run, to do something. Then came a soft thump against the step beneath my door. The same place the first pumpkin had been left. My stomach turned. I couldn't stay in the dark any longer. My hand snapped the headlights on. The beam caught the turnout in a wide cone of pale white. Empty asphalt, sagging trees, no figure, no intruder, just the hollow quiet of night. My chest heaved as my eyes darted everywhere, desperate for a body, a face, anything that would explain the presence I'd felt. Then I looked down. On the step sat another pumpkin. Its face was fresh, dripping, the cuts so new that strings of pulp still clung to the edges. But this time, the likeness wasn't just similar. It was exact. My nose, my eyes, the narrow set of my jaw, all of it captured with unnerving precision. The mouth was carved into an open scream, as if mocking the expression frozen on my own face in that very moment. Something inside me snapped. I leapt from the driver's seat, threw open the door, and kicked the pumpkin into the dark. It burst against the asphalt, flesh and seeds spraying across the ground. "Enough," I roared into the night, my voice cracking. "Enough of this." My words echoed back from the trees, empty, useless. But silence followed. No footsteps, no laugh of a prankster revealed, just the stillness of night, broken only by the faint hum of the RV's engine. I slammed the door, locked it, and gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles whitened. My body buzzed with adrenaline, trembling like a wire about to snap. I couldn't stay. I turned the ignition, pulled back onto the road, and drove with reckless urgency. The night swallowed the turnout behind me, but the carved image of my own screaming face burned into my mind, more permanent than any scar. Miles passed in a blur. My body ached with exhaustion, but fear kept me sharp. Every shadow at the roadside seemed to swell with threat. Every curve of ditch or tree, a place where faces might rise. The smell of pumpkin pulp lingered still, heavy and cloying like it lived in my lungs. By dawn, my eyes stung with sleepless grit. I pulled into a gas station, desperate for light, for company, for anything human. A bell chimed as I stepped inside, the fluorescent glow harsh but comforting. The clerk gave me a tired nod as I grabbed coffee and stumbled to the counter. "You all right?" he asked, squinting at me. I opened my mouth, ready to spill the story, but the words caught. How could I explain? How could I make him believe? My throat tightened. I shook my head instead, muttered something about being tired. He rang me up, slid the cup across, and I left without another word. Back in the RV, I sipped the bitter heat, trying to calm my nerves. The parking lot was quiet, ordinary. A couple of cars, a trucker fueling up, a crow hopping across the cracked pavement. For the first time in days, nothing strange pressed against me. Until I opened the glove compartment to grab a napkin and found a pumpkin seed inside. Small, pale, sticky with fresh pulp. I froze. My skin went cold, my breath shuddering. I hadn't opened that compartment in weeks. My eyes flicked around the RV, every corner suddenly hostile. The thought burrowed deep, undeniable. Whatever was carving those faces, it wasn't outside anymore. It was in here with me. I slammed the glove compartment shut so hard the latch rattled, but the echo of that single seed stayed with me, heavier than any scream. My skin crawled, every hair on my arms rising as if the RV itself had turned hostile. I twisted in the seat, eyes scanning every shadow, the narrow closet, the fold-out bed, the dark space beneath the counter. I told myself it wasn't possible, that no one could have slipped inside while I pumped gas under the glare of fluorescence. But the logic didn't settle. The smell of raw pumpkin clung too close, thick and undeniable, as though something had been rotting in the vents for days. I couldn't sit still. My hand shot for the cupboard handle, yanking doors open one by one, half expecting to find a figure crouched inside. Nothing. Just dishes clattering, canned goods rolling against each other. I ripped back the shower curtain. Empty. Pulled open drawers, nothing but clothes, tossed in a frenzy. Yet no matter how many corners I exposed, the certainty didn't leave. Something was here. Watching. Waiting. Finally, I dropped into the driver's seat, shoving the key back into the ignition. My only plan was to keep moving, to put miles behind me until either exhaustion won or the sun itself proved I wasn't cursed. The RV roared awake, rumbling steady. I pulled onto the highway, the morning light sharp and cold through the windshield. But the road gave me no peace. Every passing mile marker felt like repetition, as if the world itself looped. Same stretch of cracked asphalt, same weathered barns, same broken fences. I checked the odometer, desperate for proof I wasn't circling back on myself, and still, the landscape looked unchanged. A nausea curled deep in my gut, the kind born not of motion, but of recognition. The world wasn't opening outward. It was folding me back in. Hours later, fatigue pressed so heavy I could barely keep my eyes open. I pulled over onto a narrow shoulder, the RV tilting slightly in the soft ditch grass. My hands shook as I killed the engine. The silence rushed in, oppressive, more final than sleep. I told myself I wouldn't close my eyes. Not again. Not after the dreams. But my body betrayed me. Exhaustion swamped every limb, pulling me down into that half-sleep where the mind still knows it's not safe. The dream came fast. I stood once more in the pumpkin field, but this time I wasn't alone. Rows of figures bent low over the pumpkins, their arms moving in unison, carving. Their bodies were pale and thin, skin stretched too tight over bones, and their faces, God, their faces were jack-o'-lanterns, hollow, glowing with light flickering from within. They turned to look at me in unison, their heads tilting at the same unnatural angle. Then they began to carve faster. Pumpkins split open under their hands, guts spilling in rivers of orange and seed, and every face they carved was mine. I woke choking on my breath, heart jackhammering, sweat slick on my skin. The RV was still, the world outside a dull afternoon haze. But I wasn't alone. On the small dinette table beside me sat a pumpkin. I hadn't brought it inside. I knew that as surely as I knew my own name. Yet here it was, placed carefully where I couldn't miss it. My throat closed as I leaned forward. The face carved into it wasn't screaming this time. It was smiling, wide, calm, almost tender. And worse, it was blinking. The lids weren't carved, but the ridges of pumpkin flesh shifted, slow, deliberate, opening and closing as though the thing was alive. My legs nearly gave out. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair, my breath tearing from me in ragged gasps. I grabbed it, desperate to throw it out, to be rid of it. But when my hands touched the rind, it was warm. Not just the sun's heat, warm like flesh. My grip faltered, horror sinking deep as the corners of its mouth twitched upward, as if it knew me. I hurled it through the RV door with every ounce of strength I had. It hit the ground outside with a dull, wet crack. I didn't wait to see if it split. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and collapsed against it, every muscle quivering. That was when I realized something worse. In the silence that followed, I could still hear it. Breathing. Not mine, not the hum of the RV, but soft, steady breaths, drawn in rhythm, coming from inside, somewhere behind me. Slowly, with dread curling through my chest, I turned, and in the reflection of the darkened microwave glass, I saw it. A second face behind mine, carved in orange, grinning, watching. I froze, every muscle in my body seizing tight. My breath caught halfway in my throat. The reflection in the microwave door was wrong. My face stared back, pale and wide-eyed, but just behind it floated another, orange, hollow, grinning. Its jagged eyes seemed to burn in the glass, though no candlelight flickered inside. I spun around, desperate to see it directly, but the cabin was empty. Just the narrow kitchen, the fold-out table, the clutter I had left in my panic. Yet when I turned back, the reflection lingered. My own face, terrified, framed by another one hovering close enough that I should have felt it breathing against my neck. My knees weakened. I staggered back until I hit the wall, palms slick with sweat. Every instinct screamed that I wasn't alone, that something occupied the same air, the same space, though my eyes refused to show me. I forced myself to move, yanked open the door, and stumbled into the daylight. The world outside was quiet, too quiet. The shoulder of the highway stretched in both directions, no cars passing, no birds circling overhead. My RV sat heavy on the grass, looking almost alien against the empty landscape. I turned in a slow circle, scanning for anyone, for anything, but the world had gone still. Then I saw them. Pumpkins. Dozens of them. They lined the ditch, the slope of the hill, even the edge of the trees in the distance. Their faces were fresh, pulp glistening in the light, everyone staring straight at me. Some smiling, some grimacing, some stretched into distorted parodies of human emotion, and all of them looked like me. My breath hitched as I stumbled backward toward the RV, my boots slipping in the wet grass. The faces didn't move, but the air felt alive, as though 1,000 eyes were tracking every twitch of my muscles. The smell hit me then, the cloying sweetness of fresh-cut pumpkin layered with something darker, sour, like rot creeping beneath. I bolted inside and locked the door, collapsing into the driver's seat, my hands trembling so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. The RV roared to life. I slammed it into gear and tore back onto the road, tires spitting gravel behind me. The pumpkins vanished in the mirrors, swallowed by distance, but the smell remained, seared into the fabric of the cabin, into my very skin. I drove until dusk, headlights carving tunnels through the dimming sky. Exhaustion clawed at my mind, but fear kept me sharp, wired, unable to close my eyes. Every mile blurred into the next until I no longer knew where I was. The map on the dash told me I should have reached the next town hours ago, but the road stretched endlessly, barren. No cars, no houses, no signs of life. Then I saw it. A glow on the horizon, faint at first, then sharper as I drew near. My chest tightened. Cabin lights, warm and golden, burning steady against the dark. Relief crashed through me. Finally, a house, maybe a farm, people, anything human. I pressed the accelerator, my whole body aching for the comfort of another voice. But as I drew closer, my relief curdled. It wasn't a house, it was the field. The same one I had left days ago, rows upon rows of unpicked pumpkins gleaming under the rise of a pale, bloated moon. My stomach dropped into ice. Somehow, impossibly, I had been driven back here. The RV shuddered as I slowed to a crawl, my eyes wide, my hands clammy on the wheel. And then I saw the faces. Every pumpkin was carved now. Every single one. Thousands of them, stretching out to the horizon, lit from within by a glow that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Their mouths moved, slow and deliberate, not with flame but with breath. And though I couldn't hear words, I felt the sound inside me, wet whispers, low and unending, shaping my name again and again until the syllables didn't sound human anymore. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. My chest constricted. I couldn't breathe. The wheels slipped from my grip as my body convulsed with panic. I wanted to turn back, to flee, but the RV wouldn't move. The engine hummed steady. The headlights burned bright, but the tires refused to roll as if the road itself had locked me in place. The whispers grew louder. The faces leaned closer, or maybe the field stretched toward me. It didn't matter. I was surrounded, trapped. My reflection flickered in the windshield, and for the briefest moment, it wasn't my face looking back. It was theirs. Hollow, grinning, waiting. I understood then, in a clarity colder than death. The pumpkins weren't just carved into my likeness, they were becoming me. I gripped the wheel tighter, as if my strength alone could keep my identity intact, but the reflection in the windshield betrayed me. My own eyes were hollowing, darkening, turning into the jagged cuts of a jack-o'-lantern. My mouth quivered into the outline of that same cruel grin. I blinked hard, desperate to break it, to see myself again. But the glass only shimmered back another version of me carved in orange flesh, pulp dripping from the edges of my cheeks. The whispers pressed harder, no longer content to crawl at the edges of thought. They seeped into me, filled my chest like wet smoke. My name fractured, repeated, layered over itself until it lost all meaning. Daniel. Daniel, Daniel. 1,000 different mouths, 1,000 different tones, and all of them mine. I slammed the gear shift into reverse, then drive, then reverse again, my foot pounding the pedal. The RV howled, tires spinning, engines straining, but the vehicle didn't budge. It was as if the field itself had clenched its fists around me. My hands shook so badly the keys rattled in the ignition. And then came the knock. A soft, deliberate rap on the side door. Not frantic, not demanding. Patient. 3 steady knocks, each one echoing through the hollow cabin. My skin went cold. I didn't move. Couldn't. My body was locked, heart hammering, lungs seizing in shallow gasps. The knocks came again, 3 measured beats. Whoever, or whatever was outside, wasn't going away. Finally, with dread clawing deep, I forced myself to look. Through the thin curtain of the RV window, I saw it, a figure standing in the glow of the field. Its shape was human, tall and still. But where the head should have been was a pumpkin. My pumpkin. The face was mine, carved clean and sharp, grinning wide with cuts so deep I swore I could see the glow flicker inside its hollow chest. My vision swam. My throat burned with the taste of bile. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just waited, as if certain I would open the door, and part of me wanted to. A sick, irresistible urge pulled at my hand, told me to turn the latch, to step down into the soil and join the rows of faces. The fear didn't fight it, it became the reason. If I stepped out, maybe the whispers would stop, maybe the staring eyes would finally turn away. But then, beneath the fear, another thought pushed through. What if stepping out means there won't be a me left to come back? I staggered backward from the door, shaking, muttering aloud to drown the whispers. No, 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 you're not me, you're not me. The words cracked in my throat, but saying them kept my hands off the latch. The figure tilted its head, slow and deliberate, the way a predator studies prey. Then it lifted one long arm and pointed. Not at me, but at the field. I followed the gesture with my eyes and felt my chest cave. The pumpkins were moving, not rolling, not shifting from the wind. They were rising, straining against their vines, dragging themselves upright. Hollow faces tilted toward me, hundreds of them swaying as though pulled by one invisible rhythm. The glow inside them brightened, pulsing with each whisper of my name. I stumbled back into the narrow aisle of the RV, my heel catching on the table leg. My shoulder slammed the wall, pain sparking, but I barely felt it. The air inside was suffocating, thick with the reek of pulp and rot. My reflection in the microwave glass flickered again, my face splitting open, seeds spilling from my mouth. No, I shouted, half sobbing, slamming my fist against the metal. I'm not yours. But even as the words tore out of me, I knew the truth pressing like vines into my skull. It wasn't about what I claimed. It was about what they were carving. Each cut, each scrape in the rind outside was a piece of me being rewritten. I thought of the first sound, the knife dragging slow across pumpkin skin, and realized with horror that it had never stopped. I just learned to carry the sound inside my head. And now, whether I opened the door or not, the carving was almost done. My body shook so violently I thought my bones might splinter beneath my skin. Every instinct screamed to move, to run, to do something. But the RV had become a coffin, its walls tightening in on me, its windows nothing more than mirrors showing me futures I couldn't escape. My own reflection hollowed and grinned back from every surface, each version of me more grotesque than the last. The microwave. The windshield. Even the faint shimmer in the coffee pot glass showed teeth carved where my lips should be. I slammed my eyes shut, but that was worse. Behind my lids, I saw them, pumpkins stacked high, endless rows of orange faces grinning with my features, and in the middle, a single one uncarved. Blank. Waiting. My skin crawled as I realized it was me. I was the last one. The knocking came again, louder now. Not 3 beats this time, but 5. A rhythm, deliberate, like someone drumming a knife handle against the door. My chest hitched with every strike, the sound rattling through me until I swore I could feel it in my ribs. I couldn't take it anymore. A surge of adrenaline broke through the paralysis, and I lunged forward, yanking the curtains open wide. The figure was still there. Closer. It stood only feet from the door now, its carved face impossibly familiar, its eyes hollow but glistening, as though wet with life. And in its hand, it held a knife. The blade caught the moonlight in a dull gleam, but I knew it wasn't metal. It was bone, whittled down, sharp and white, long as my forearm. My stomach lurched as recognition struck. It wasn't just my face carved into that head. It was me. The jawline, the brow, the tilt of the nose. It was perfect. Better than the crude attempts in the earlier pumpkins. The thing outside was the final draft. It lifted the knife and tapped it against the glass. Once. Twice. Then it bent down, slow and patient, and pressed the knife tip to the step. Scrape. The sound that had haunted me since the first night. Steady, dragging, splitting rind and flesh in that patient rhythm. I snapped. A scream ripped out of me. Raw, desperate, animal. I threw the RV into drive and stomped the accelerator. The engine roared, tires shrieked, and at last the grip that held me broke. The RV lurched forward, slamming me against the seat. I didn't look back. Couldn't. The mirrors only showed the glow. The thousands of carved faces leaning forward, watching me tear away into the night. My hands clamped the wheel so tight, my knuckles burned white. But still, I felt the vibrations of that scrape in my bones. Mile after mile blurred past. My body trembled with the need to stop, to collapse, but fear kept me upright. I drove until the sky paled with dawn, until the road finally gave way to the edges of a small town. Gas stations, a church steeple, human life. Relief should have hit me, but it didn't, because the town was empty. No cars, no people, just silence as heavy as the fields. Curtains hung limp in windows, doors stood closed, and lining the sidewalks, pumpkins. Every porch, every storefront, every corner was filled with them. Dozens, hundreds, thousands, carved faces grinning with hollow eyes, some crude, some delicate, all of them familiar, all of them me. I slammed the brakes. The RV skidded to a halt in the middle of Main Street, the engine groaning. My chest heaved as I stared at the endless faces, my vision tunneling. And then, from somewhere deep in the town, a sound rose. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Not one knife this time, but hundreds, thousands. The whole town was carving, and every cut was mine. The sound built until it felt like the asphalt itself was splitting beneath me. Scrape after scrape, patient and deliberate, an orchestra of blades dragging through wet flesh. My skin crawled with every stroke, my heartbeat sinking with the rhythm against my will. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside. Inside the walls of the RV, inside my skull, carving itself into me. I stumbled from the driver's seat and pressed my back against the kitchenette counter, gasping, eyes darting across the narrow cabin. Every surface reflected pieces of me, warped and twisted. The microwave glass, the dark screen of the GPS, even the chrome faucet, each one showing a face more carved than the last. Jagged mouths stretched wider, deeper, hollow sockets where my eyes should be. And then, the smell. It hit like a wave, so thick I gagged. Sweet, wet pumpkin flesh mixed with the unmistakable copper tang of blood. It poured through the vents, seeped through the seams of the windows, coated the back of my throat. I spat bile onto the floor, choking, clawing at the latch of the window to shove it open. But when the pain slid up, the smell didn't lessen. It intensified. Because outside, Main Street wasn't just lined with pumpkins anymore. They were moving. One by one, they toppled forward from stoops and sidewalks, vines twitching like limbs. They didn't roll, they dragged, pulling themselves across the pavement, hollow mouths clacking wetly against the ground. Their carved faces tilted upward, all of them turning toward my RV. My faces. Thousands of them. "No," I whispered, voice breaking, though I didn't know who I was begging. "No, no, no." The RV shook. A heavy thump rocked the side panel, then another. I spun toward the noise, heart hammering. Shadows passed across the curtains, dozens of them. Hollow faces pressed against the glass, their grins distorted by the curve. And then came the knocking. Not 3 beats, not 5, but endless, a rain of fists or vines or knives, hammering every inch of the RV, pounding the walls like a storm. The whole vehicle groaned, metal squealing as if it might buckle. My hands flew to the wheel. I had to move. I had to get out. I twisted the key. The engine roared. The RV jolted forward, slamming through the swarm of pumpkins. Rinds burst under the tires, pulp spraying across the windshield in a spray of orange and seed. The smell grew unbearable, suffocating as I swerved down the empty street. But no matter how many I crushed, more filled the road ahead. Faces smeared across the glass, my own jagged grin reflecting back at me in 1,000 grotesque variations. The scraping didn't stop. It grew louder, sharper, cutting through the roar of the engine, the crunch of pumpkin flesh. And then, silence. I blinked, stunned. The road ahead was clear. The noise had vanished. My chest heaved as I slowed, scanning the street with wide, disbelieving eyes. Nothing moved. The sidewalks were empty. The town lay still again, as if nothing had happened. Relief flickered, but it didn't last. Because in the center of the road, standing alone in the quiet, was a single figure. Tall, still, human-shaped, and wearing my face carved in perfect orange flesh. Its grin stretched wider than any blade could make, and in its hand, dripping with pulp and seeds, it held a knife of bone. It raised the knife slowly, pointing it at me. And behind it, in the shadows of every doorway and alley, thousands of other figures began to rise. The knife stayed leveled at me, steady as a compass needle pointing north. My body went rigid in the driver's seat, my hands welded to the wheel, but I couldn't press the gas, couldn't even breathe. The figure stood in the center of Main Street, orange skin gleaming slick under the waning moonlight, its carved hollows burning with something deeper than light, something alive. And from the doorways, the alleys, the rooftops, more of them emerged. They weren't just pumpkins anymore. They were people-shaped, each body woven from vines, each head carved from rind, and every face was mine, an entire town of me, grinning in hollow silence. My stomach twisted as I realized what had been carved wasn't just likeness, it was replication. Copy after copy, each more complete, more perfected. And I was standing in the way of their becoming. The scraping began again. Not knives this time, but their hands. Thousands of vine-wrapped fingers dragging across wood, glass, brick, every surface of the town joining in chorus, carving reality itself into orange flesh. The sound vibrated through my bones until I thought my ribs might split. The figure with the bone knife tilted its head, the motion painfully human, and then it smiled wider. Its chest expanded, and for the first time, sound came out. Not whispers, not my name, but laughter. My laughter. The exact cadence, the exact tone, as if a mirror had learned to mock me. And when the rest of them joined in, the town drowned in a chorus of my own voice echoing back at me, hundreds of hollow mouths cackling the way I had once laughed with friends, lovers, strangers. Every joy I had ever expressed stolen, gutted, and played back at me in grotesque unison. I slammed my foot on the gas, the RV screaming forward. The figure didn't move until the last instant, when it stepped aside with impossible grace. The bone knife dragged across the side panel as I passed, a single shrieking line etched deep into the metal. I barreled down the street, pumpkins bursting under the tires, laughter chasing me like a living storm. Faces pressed against the windows as I tore through the edge of town, orange pulp smearing across the glass until I could barely see. The road stretched ahead into the dark endless, a black ribbon winding deeper into nowhere. But in the windshield reflection, I saw it. Not the road, not the night, the field, always the field. Row after row of pumpkins stretching beyond the horizon, every one of them glowing, every one of them grinning with my face. I let out a ragged sob as my vision blurred, my grip loosening on the wheel. The RV shuddered, the engine roared, and somewhere in the rhythm of it all, I understood the truth I had been denying since the first scrape of a knife against rind. I wasn't escaping. I was being carved. Every mile I drove, every scream I gave, every choice I made, each was just another cut, another line shaping me into the thing they wanted. And when the carving was done, when the face was finished, there would be no me left, just another hollow grin in the field. The laughter rose one last time, deafening, filling every corner of the RV until I thought the glass would shatter. I screamed into it, my voice lost in the chorus of my own stolen sound. And as the headlights cut deeper into the dark, the reflection in the windshield no longer showed my face at all. It showed a jack-o'-lantern, grinning, hollow, finished. And in that moment, I was already theirs.